Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Tom Bennett. I'm one of the Vice Chairs of the Planning Applications Committee, and I will be chairing this evening's meeting. To my right are my fellow councillors, and it will be the 5 of us who are making the decisions tonight. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Ali.
Thank you all for coming here this evening. My name is Councillor Qasim Ali.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Sonia Svednyuk for Chelsea Riverside Ward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Lloyd North, and I represent Camden Ward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Wala Idris, and I represent Brompton and Handstown.
Thank you very much. And to my left is the officer team, who's led this evening by Lisa Chung. And they will be presenting the cases and providing us with advice throughout the evening. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I assume we have no apologies. Very good, no apologies for absence. Do any members have any declarations of interest? Yes, Councillor North.
Yes, it's not a pecuniary interest, it's just another interest. I serve on the board of directors for ESSA, which is an objector in the first case, but I haven't been involved directly with this case. I represent their mansion block group. Okay, very good. I don't think that precludes you from being on the committee for that case, but it's certainly worth adding that to the record. The next item is minutes. Minutes were circulated before the meeting. Are members happy that I sign those as a true record? Agreed? Yep. Very good. So I'll just go through the running order for this evening, and we've tried to put the cases that have speakers further up the running order. So we're going to be starting with, let me make sure I've got this right. Starting with 2A and 2B Lexham Mews, then 8 Queenstown Walk, then 51 Millman Street, then 6 Brunswick Gardens, 33 Wallingford Avenue, 7 St Mary Abbots Place, Gunter Hall on Gunter Grove, 25 Old Church Street, and finishing with 3 Cromwell Road. I'll just remind anyone who's speaking this evening, firstly, we can only hear from people who have registered to speak. You'll be given 3 minutes, both sides, both objectors and applicants are given 3 minutes each to speak. If there's more than one of you speaking, you do have to share that time. And please keep it to time, and I'll signal when we get to the end of 3 minutes. If we start going over, then the whole process can be called into questions. It sounds quite austere, but it is important that we speak to time. But remember that there will then be a Q&A with members of the committee after that. So if there are any points you don't get the chance to go into detail in at that point, don't worry, there's a good chance you'll be asked about it. I think that's it. So let's move to the first case.
Thank you, Chairman. Just turning to the slides, the first case for you this evening is at number 2A, Lexham Mews. Sorry, IT is just failing us 1 second. Oh, here we are. It's changing, sorry, it's changing on there but not here, so as long as it's changing for you. Okay, brilliant. So just firstly drawing members' attention to the addendum report, because we importantly received 2 additional objections to this case. This application has been before the Planning Applications Committee previously. It was deferred by members with a request for additional information, and also to consider alongside the application at number 2B Lexham Mews, because they are very similar, and you will see that from the photographs when I turn to them. So they're on the same agenda, but they are 2 separate planning decisions. So planning permission is sought for the demolition of the property at number 2A Lexham Mews, the excavation of a single-storey basement and the erection of a new mansard roof level. This is the site location plan. It's within the Edward Square, Scarsdale and Abingdon Conservation Area. And number 1, Lexham Mews, the sort of triangular plot just to the south, was approved at that same committee from which this one was deferred. There's some contextual photographs to show you their location and the relationships to neighbours. The site were previously, a long time ago, garages that have now changed and are used as dwellings, and you can see some photographs there. These help understand why members deferred it previously, that relationship between 2A and 2B being quite crucial because they are similar in appearance and arrangement, with number 1 closer to the Mews Arch being slightly different. And planning permission, as I said, has been granted for the demolition of that property, the mansard and the basement. Here's some additional contextual photographs. And then turning to the plans, we have the existing floor plans, existing elevations, and an existing section. And these are the proposed elevations in front of you. Importantly, again, the basement level was previously approved in September 2018. The mansard level was also approved previously in September 2019 through an appeal. Those permissions have now lapsed, but still carry, in our opinion, substantial weight. There's lots of other history that's noted in the report on the sites and next door, and we have some live appeals against non-determinations on the site, but nothing has been determined or decided, so they don't carry any weight at the moment. And just turning to this contextual image, which I think is helpful, this was provided following the deferral just to show that relationship better. Number 1 to the left at the bottom has already been approved, so that development is extant. And the 2 properties to the right-hand side, number 2A in the centre and 2B considered elsewhere on this agenda, you can show that relationship. Officers are recommending approval for this application, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We joined this evening by Alison Doran. Hello. You have 3 minutes to speak. Just one sec, let me get my timer out. There we go. As I say, thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you. There's a statutory duty on councils making decisions affecting conservation areas to pay special attention to preserving and enhancing their character and appearance. The proposals, which involve the complete demolition of the properties and the construction of new properties, not only fails to maintain the historic footprint of the properties, but highlights a complete disregard to the history and significance of this conservation area. The construction of new built houses at the entrance to this area is wholly disproportionate and will detract from the appearance of the area. The fact the developer plans to use brick tiles and may sell the properties after the works highlights the approach to this development being one of cost-cutting and money-making. Such blatant disregard to maintain the historic footprint and character of this area is unjustifiable. Further, this appears to be a commercial venture rather than one of 3 household applications. St Philip's Church is also a local landmark, which is right beside the site. It's located, however, it's not highlighted in the photos, and that would be put at structural risk alongside its stained glass windows. The developer claims no machinery would be used in the excavation of the basements, which would be carried out by hand, yet has stated that the proposals will be completed in 10 months. This seems improbable. An additional story across all 3 houses will significantly impede the light entering the whole Mews laneway, thereby further diminishing its appearance and the neighbours' right to light. The Council should resist demolition in conservation areas unless it can be justified. The claimed sustainability benefits would not justify the proposals and would in fact create a high carbon footprint and damage the protected trees in the vicinity, which actually reduce carbon in the atmosphere. The Council's SPD guidance on sustainability is clear and states that retention and refurbishment of buildings should be prioritised over demolition and rebuilding. The UK government has stated that buildings should be reused and refurbished rather than demolished, which results in embodied carbon being emitted. They have stated that if there is nothing structurally wrong with the property, it should not be demolished. Michael Gove's overruling of the recommendation to demolish the Marks & Spencer's building last week on Oxford Street highlights this. In addition to preserving the heritage building, the project was criticised over the environmental concerns, noting that retrofitting the existing structure is more sustainable. Furthermore, the Mayor of London has stated similar strategies in its commitment to achieve London being carbon neutral. demolition and redevelopment are now seen as an inappropriate way to achieve carbon neutrality, with reuse of existing buildings seen as the preferred method. The proposals will lead to structural issues for neighbouring properties and put key historic assets such as the arch at the entrance and St Philip's Church at risk. The excavation and construction of large basements across the whole terrace of houses in an area flagged moderate for ground stability issues must be considered. The application for the proposed basements did not include sustainable urban drainage system required under policy CL71. In our own flood search carried out last year, the surface water flood risk was deemed high.
So I'm going to have to ask you to stop there, but thank you very much for that. And as I say, we can follow up on several of those points under questions later. Are we joined by Adina Rousseau for the applicant? Yes, hello. Thank you for joining us. Likewise, you have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Councillors, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in favour of this planning application. My name is Adina Rousseau. I'm a consultant on this development representing Nanik, who sends his apologizes for not being able to attend in person. We are aware that the sustainability element was previously discussed. However, I would like to emphasize our full commitment to comply to passive house levels of insulation sought. Nanik has reached out to both objectors who spoke at the last PAC meeting. The objector of 35 Lexham Mews did not reply, although there were numerous attempts to discuss their concerns. Nanik met with the objectors of 31 Lexham Mews, Sylvia Amoros, and the ESSA Barry Monday on the 12th of June 23. The objectors and Nanik briefly spoke about the advantages and disadvantages of demolition, internal and external insulation of existing walls, and the carbon footprint of temporary works, but the conversation was quite short as the objectors admitted that they were not experts in matters of sustainability. Barry Monday asserted that the existing elevations provided a positive contribution to the conservation area. We, the RBKC planning team, nor the PAC committee agree with this statement. The conversation turned into a non-planning related matters which are not worth repeating. We are provided an existing and proposed slide for 2A and 2B Lexham Mews to assist the committee with the decision making and show what a positive impact the development will have on these 3 houses and to the wider conservation area. We strongly believe this development will improve the area, and we would like to be regarded as an example, although on a small scale, for the upcoming schemes, and are committed to respect all the norms in terms of sustainability and energy efficiency. Nanik is watching the live feed as I speak, and he can communicate with me via WhatsApp if further information needed. I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have. I would like to thank you in advance for granting the planning permission for this development.
Thank you very much. As we now move on to questions to objectors and applicants from members, colleagues. Yes, Councillor Idris.
I have 2 questions. The first one to the applicant. Can you explain to me why you're demolishing the existing buildings?
So the purpose of the redevelopment is to build a building of apartments.
Can you speak on the microphone, please? I can't hear you very well.
Would you mind if I I connect you with the developer himself on the phone? Because I might not be able to...
We can't do that, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, and sorry, Ms. Durham,
Okay.
I think your microphone's still on. Just got to press the button again. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so then can you well, I guess I can't ask you the second question, because if you can't give me, it's okay. Thank you. A question to the objector. Do you have any idea about the history of the building? Do you know when were these buildings built?
I have limited information because obviously they're not our properties. However, you can just see from the photos alone that the ground floor seems to be original, and it seems to be the first floor that obviously isn't quite as original. But still, I don't think that that's sufficient justification to demolish a whole set of buildings.
Have the applicant consulted with the...
So I wanted to correct actually that apparently several mistakes were, or several attempts were made. From what I understand, we have one, in fact I know, we received one written letter. I informed the developer that as I represent the owners, that, we're under confidentiality obligations, so under no circumstances was I allowed to provide my or their contact information. I said, if you wish to get in touch with us, do so by letter. However, I understand he has been, from what I've heard, on a number of occasions, I won't say aggressively, but on several occasions trying to get our contact details from other parties involved, such as surveyors. However, obviously they can't provide those details. So one attempt, a written letter was made, setting, well, nothing really particularly relevant to the proposals. One, I mean, I'm not really at liberty to discuss,
Okay.
but...
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Zvedeniuk and then Councillor North.
Thank you. A question for, well, either the applicant or objector. Are you able to explain a little bit more about what the impact will be on the surrounding neighbourhood or on the surrounding houses if there were an additional storey on, it's not really two, it's three, is it not? Yeah. Sort of three connecting houses. If there were an additional storey on mansard, how would that impact? Is that sort of in line with the adjoining houses? And also, I note that when you walk into Lexham Mews, there's a nice archway that's a bit more distinctive because the houses on the left are sort of lower terraces. They're not
That's
tall
exactly it. So
Yeah.
you'll see
So
from the initial drawings that were submitted, actually the development is a terrace that kind of forms the top of a T shape. And so essentially it's quite a substantial increase to the additional floor. And so I think the applicant was referring to similar properties in the area, but they're actually, I think, further on Earls Court Road, not actually on Lexham Mews. And so the addition of this storey on top of the current, what is it, 2 stories, is quite substantial, and I think will have quite an impact on the light coming into the Mews, and actually will really quite badly impact the archway, which is such a key and crucial part of this at the entrance of this conservation area, and which was recently renovated. So not only would it be put at structural risk, it just will not have the same impact or appearance, shall we say. I mean, obviously there are several other negative impacts on the area, but just in terms of the additional height, I mean, it will just be, in my eyes, a bit of an eyesore because obviously it's a modern development and will just be very out of place. But I think quite crucially, it will severely impact or materially impact the light to all the neighbouring properties, in particular the owners that I represent.
And did you want to put that question to the applicant as well? Would you like to give an answer
As
to
far
that?
as we are concerned, there is no light issues, so there will be no implications on the light because the property will have the same height as the other properties.
So you're saying that it goes no higher than the adjoining properties?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, we can check that with officers later, but thank you. Councillor North.
Thank you. I'm quite familiar with this property. I live nearby to Lexham Mews. It is a beautiful mews with a restored arch. There is huge sensitivity in the area. I'm sure the applicant's agent will understand. So my first question to the applicant is, just on your last point about light, considering that the taller buildings are to the north of the mews, so therefore won't be affected by sun, The building in question is to the west of the Mews, which is as the sun sets in the west. So therefore, it's got to be blatantly obvious to anybody walking down that Mews that it's going to be a shadow cast across the Victorian Mews. My question is that accepted? The second question is, are you, bearing in mind this is 3 buildings, had the committee been aware of one Lexham Mews was linked to this one by the same developer? I don't think they would have got planning permission, that's my opinion. But however, I noticed that brick slips are being used in this development. Is the applicant wedded to brick slips, or would he consider using real bricks that would answer the questions and the objections raised to this becoming a fake frontage to a Victorian Mews?
So, as far as I'm aware, we would like to match the surroundings. There will be no innovation in materials, nothing that would affect the conservation area. So, I don't think they will have a massive impact on the...
Sorry, can I just pull you on that one? You say it matches the other... There's no brick slips in that Mews. They're all original Victorian brickwork. You're looking to replace original brickwork, which currently is painted, I'll give you that, which is the original garages on the ground floor. I did do a bit of research as well on this. You're looking to replace it with brick slips, which in effect are fake bricks, which at a tall building you can notice that you wouldn't notice they were brick slips. But when you're at ground level and eye level and at touching distance, the facade of this is going to not be real proper London bricks. This is going to be brick slips. That's why I'm trying
Would you consider using bricks instead of brick slips?
on all the development.
And the other question was, do you accept that there will be, or what do you believe the shadow impact will be, given that the buildings in question are to the west of the Mews?
With regards to the materials used, I'm assuming there will be materials that would be specified by the architects who would be in a great relationship with the planning, so with the planning committee. So there will be a communication, and we make sure everything will be approved by the committee, by the planning committee. And on we'll actually, I've just got the confirmation, we'll use real slip or real bricks. And on the lighting, to be honest, I can't answer this question.
Okay. But there's no problem. Well, thank you for your comments around real bricks, and we'll certainly bring that up with officers. I'd also just like to ask to the objectors, to Ms. Doran, presumably you believe that real bricks would be an improvement over brick slips?
Yes, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that it's a complete demolition, unjustified, and essentially a new build. Even when traditional bricks are used, it still doesn't take away. And not only that, you could see from the proposed drawings, it's quite substantial, the development. It's the whole line of the terrace.
Yeah.
At the entrance to a conservation area. It really doesn't give the right impression upon arrival.
Understood, thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking from experience of housing and communities as a chair previously, and the chair worked with me on that committee, we have been dealing with runoff water and flooding. And I understand from the application you have not submitted, and this question is to the agent, applicant's agent, sustainable drainage system. Was this not required for the application, or you just didn't want to give, since you are demolishing a property and then building a new one? Have you thought about the flooding if that occurs again? That's the first question to you, and then I will ask another question to the objector. This is something that we need to discuss and consult specialists
with regards to this matter. We have considered, we thought about it, and we'll definitely assess the problem in the most efficient way.
Yep.
Thank you for that answer. My question is to Alison. If the properties, I understand it will, is any property next to you or neighboring will impact, and whether it's the pollution, traffic, and everything else that comes with it, it does normally. But what is your objection mainly? If the other properties are the same height, I understand demolition
Yes.
will cost, but if there are properties or the same height as the one proposed now, are you not allowing a neighbor to build and to make a better for themselves? What is exactly your objection?
Well-
If the height is the same, obviously the brick we talked about, that could be a condition, and the flooding.
Yeah.
But what is your actual objective on
Well,
today?
certainly, with regards to our property alone, there are two primary risks. First, that of ground stability and the potential damage that could be done to our property, which forms part of St. Philip's Church, which is like a historic landmark in the area. And so when we acquired the properties, we ourselves had carried out our own, obviously, reports in terms of ground stability, potential flooding risks, etc. It was deemed moderate, so 33 to 35 Lexham Mews were all deemed moderate in terms of ground stability risks. So it was flagged as a potential risk. And then in terms of flooding, the surface water flood risk, as I said before, was deemed high. We have a cellar, and so, that could potentially flood. We're right beside, we share a party wall with 2B, which is the third property that's being demolished. And so the excavation of a 3.4 metre basement is quite concerning to us.
Yes, please go ahead.
I've just mentioned the flooding issue will
Yeah.
be, obviously, if we were to improve, and it depends on what the councillors, the committee will do. But if the flooding issue has been flagged before, and the agent said, the applicant's agent, that they're considering to do something about it, will that be something personally, or
Frankly,
the area?
No.
No.
Sorry to
Okay.
interrupt you.
Thank
It's
you.
just, it would put undue stress, I think, on the owners for the whole duration of the development. And I think this 10-month timeline is frankly quite misleading, and I think it could take a number of years. And so to put that level of stress, not only in terms of potential flooding risk, but more importantly in terms of structural risk, to our beautiful old property, which was acquired obviously because, with an interest in retaining it for a significant amount of time, and obviously similar to other owners who acquire the properties in that area solely for the historic appearance, and it's quite a peaceful laneway.
Happy to move on to the next section of the meeting? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you both very much. We now move on to the next section of the meeting where members ask questions to officers. So we can't interact any further with objectors or applicants, no matter how much we might want to, but just questions for officers now. Colleagues who would like to start? Yes, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask officers the same question. Do we have an idea how old is this build? When were they built?
Yes, thank you. Just bringing up the photographs there. These were originally garages, so these buildings that have evolved into homes are not historic. They're in the conservation area appraisal as a neutral building, so they're not harmful because they do have similar characteristics to Mews-style properties and so on, but they're not something we're seeking to preserve or protect because they're not excellent examples. As a run of three, you can see there's huge variations in their window openings, their treatment, and their relationship to the street. You can see the beautiful restored arch that we've talked about there in the forefront. And number one that has the permission, you can just see it there. It's kind of a strange, quirky site, but not one of historic interest.
Okay. My second question is, could the existing buildings be configured internally without being demolished?
Can I just add to that question? I mean, because it has been raised both by Ms. Duran this evening and by other objectors, the issue of reuse. What weight have we given, and do we have any policy which places onus on developers to try, or applicants to try and reuse the existing buildings? What weight have we given to the environmental impact of not doing that?
We do have policies in our plan relating to climate change and sustainability. We also have our greening SPD, so all of that has fed into our decision making already. These buildings in particular are, as I said, not historic. They've kind of come about over time, and we are comfortable with the principle of demolition and rebuild because of the sustainability credentials overall would be, in our opinion, improved once built. So it is part of the balance. So there is a negative, you know, if we could reuse them, that would be better. But we have an extant permission at number 1 for exactly the same thing, to demolish and rebuild. And there's also an opportunity to enhance the appearance of these buildings, in our opinion, having, you know, a more attractive frontage to the Mews. So I'll just turn back to the slides of what you're weighing up. So the existing buildings are at the top, and a more traditional Mews-style property proposed at the bottom. So at that, we've weighed those things all together in the balance and recommending approval for that reason.
Can I just confirm, obviously they don't go higher than number 1 because they're sort of all designed together, but is it also correct to say that they don't go higher than the buildings on the other side?
I actually don't know the exact measurements of the other properties, but it's comparable, definitely, in height, and it's identical to what was allowed at appeal. So the mansards have already been approved back in 2019. We, I believe, refused them for amenity reasons, so not character and appearance, but amenity reasons, and an inspector didn't agree with us and gave planning permission for that. So I can't tell you exactly that it's identical in height, but it's relative to the 2019 permission. The same. So we're definitely comfortable with the height, and there's lots of other mansards down the Mews.
Councillor North.
Thank you. I understand that we are to give weight to the extant permission for number 1. I've raised questions about that because had the committee known that this was coming up, I think it would have been a very different position. Why is it that this case has been held back almost deliberately while one goes through? Because the reason number 2A was held back was because we only found out about that when it was presented to us by the objector. So is there a reason why this was held back?
The arch wasn't the reason the application was deferred. So the last meeting this went to, number 2A, it was presented with number 1, which is the one closest to the arch. And planning permission was granted subject to a condition for details relating to the structural stability of the arch to make sure that it is protected during the course of construction and beyond. So that the number 1, the one with the relationship to the arch, which you can see that arch just on this image on the bottom half, the kind of white strip. So that's got permission, and that relationship has permission. This one, number 2A, and the following one, which you will see after this, isn't physically connected to the arch in any way.
No, sorry, that wasn't my question. My question was, is there a reason why this application they're not been presented as a whole? It seems they were salami sliced in that 1 came up, then 2A came up, and then for some reason 2B didn't feature in it. But literally of a number of days later, 2B comes into the question. It looks almost deliberate that this was held back for a reason. I'm just asking, is there a reason that the whole terrace did not come to planning? Because many people that were sat on that planning were not aware of the full picture, and we were very concerned that we're having now to give weight to number 1 that has gone through, but we didn't know this was coming up. And yes, it was only days later.
Yeah,
is
so
the question.
why weren't they brought all together, all 3 applications?
Well, it was very clear in the officer report. I actually presented number 1 and 2A that there were the 3 permissions and all the history, and we've duplicated that again in this one, because there was actually about 9 or 10 applications that have come forward across the 3 sites. It's not my preferred way of dealing with them as an officer, I have to be honest with you. It makes it more difficult weighing all the considerations up. but we must, in line with the legislation that we consider it under, look at each case on its own merits. So whilst it's not our preferred way, we have these separate applications that we must determine, and you need to give weight to ones that come before and come after to a degree. Come before, you have to give weight to. The ones that come after, however, you don't give as much weight to because there's no decision on them. So you can individually refuse all of these, but you have to also think about the overall balance and the benefit of being consistent in decision making and the positive impact that it may have on the Mews as a whole. But I understand it's not my preferred way of dealing with it either, I would say.
It's just a little bit difficult for a committee to consider something that's been salami sliced, and it almost looks as though it was deliberately held back. I just think it would have been more helpful to especially in a conservation area with a sensitive subject and a whole terrace of this, if it had been presented with the full picture rather than 1/3 missing. But okay, I take that point. My other question is on the CTMP. Are we as a council happy with the way in which the CTMP is working? Because I'm a little bit concerned from what I've heard from the objectors, but more concerned that this is a very narrow mews, cobbled, and the picture that you show of the arch, which looks beautiful there, is before it was refurbished. And if that arch is damaged as a result of this, we will be losing a very significant piece of Victorian architecture.
I think that's a really good question. The CTMP as submitted currently isn't good enough, so we've recommended the submission of a final CTMP that would actually consider all three sites together, how it would be built, because you have to give reference to what's going on there. Members would be in their gift on this application and the one elsewhere in this report that you will consider to add the condition that you applied to number 1 Lexham Mews with regard to the arch, if you thought it was necessary to make the development acceptable, and that was an actual concern of yours. And I think that would be an option for you if you have specific concerns relating to the arch.
Sorry, can you tell us what that condition was?
I will look it up for you as you ask my next question.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Just further on that, so just to clarify, could one of our options as a committee be to bring this back to committee to consider the CTMP as a whole for all three of these units and the Mews itself?
You could request that number 2A and 2B, if granted, come back to committee for the CTMP, yes. Number 1, you couldn't at this stage because there isn't a current application to discharge that CTMP. However, I'm sure myself and Lisa could make a note to return it together if they come together, because we have the option at the director's discretion to bring things to committee.
I certainly think, especially with the sensitivity in the area and the time it's going to take to do this, with a cobbled Mews and its arch, it's important that the CTMP is considered as a whole before any works go ahead. And I've just got one other question about the light, which I did bring up before this. Now, this is a building to the west of the Mews, and it is a ground floor and first floor. Now, the sun comes across from where we're looking at and sets across to the west. Granted, on Oscourt Road there are taller buildings, but will this surely cast a shadow on the Mews, being a taller building?
I think that's another excellent question, Councillor North, because that daylight and sunlight was a key consideration for us in 2019. So officers went through this process and were concerned about that impact, but an inspector overruled us and said that was acceptable, that relationship.
Sure.
So given the site circumstances haven't changed, our policy relating to daylight and sunlight hasn't changed, we have to give considerable weight to that appeal decision. So we've come to that same conclusion, but you've gone through the exact thought process we have too.
Thank you. And just one final small question. This is in a conservation area of considerable merit and has a lot of, there's a church very butting up next to it. Does this add to the conservation area, this application? Bear in mind it's with brick slips. I'll just flag that one up.
We would say the existing building makes a neutral contribution, and the proposed building, with its continuity and traditional features, would make a more we think it would preserve it. Enhancing is subject to detailing, so we've got conditions on there. But again, returning to the issue with the brick slips, we've had confirmation from the applicants colleague that they are happy to reconsider the use of real bricks. So again, members would be in their gift to update condition number 17, I believe,
Yes.
to demand that, not demand, sorry, to request that bricks are used. And we also have that materials condition on number 1 and suggested on number 2B, so that could be considered by the applicant in,
And just to the chair and the officers, do we rely on a kind of text message for the bricks?
I think that's probably slightly besides the point, because if colleagues are agreed that we want to require bricks rather than brick slips, we just add that to the condition. I can't see any dissent. So yeah, could we add that into the condition that it would be real bricks rather than brick slips?
Thank you.
And Chairman, I just wanted to answer your question about the Mews arch, and I thought I'd opened the correct condition. Apologies. Sorry, I'm just searching on our database to find the exact wording of it, but it's to do with being supervised by a professional engineer during the course of construction, and we'd actually receive a report on how that Mews arch will be protected. So it may well be that they have boxing. We've seen lots of different measures in the past. Sometimes they prefer kind of a foam bumper to just restrict movements down there. And the CTMP in this location would need narrow-bodied vehicles anyway. But it would be a case of providing us details of the condition of the arch now and at the end of the process.
And yes.
Sorry, it's an important point, so I don't want to. I'm just bringing it up now.
Well, I think.
But Lorna's narrowed the search for me.
Can I just check
yes.
quickly? Has the CTMP for number 1 already been agreed?
No.
No, it hasn't. So, can we just confirm whether legally at this meeting we could only call back 2A and 2B, but whether it would be possible after this meeting to sort of pull all those CTMPs together and bring them back as one?
Am I correct, Lisa, that we could take it at the director's discretion, number 1?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be a committee callback as you do with others. It would be at the director's discretion to bring it back to committee, and we can make a note of that in the minutes and on the file.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming, I might be wrong, but it's likely that these schemes, if they all granted permission, will probably be constructed in one development. That would make sense, and therefore I would expect to see a CTMP, individual plans potentially, but they should be the same if it's being built out as one.
Yeah.
In which case it's captured by that anyway.
Yeah, okay. How does the committee feel then about calling back the CTMP for 2A and 2B and making a note to ask the director to include number 1 as well?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Makes sense.
Okay. Could we do that, please? Yeah.
Yes. I'll let you vote on it at the end, but just to confirm about the Lexham Mews arch, I finally found it. It was condition 10 on number 1, and it read, the development shall not be commenced until the protection, safety and stability of the Lexham Mews arch has been demonstrated through a structural stability report and method statement. The report shall be submitted and approved in writing. So that one is on number 1 because the Mews arch is directly attached, so members secured that as part of the previous permission.
Okay, and does that relate to the construction or the CTMP or both?
The construction.
The actual construction, so
yeah.
It's not so relevant really to these.
No, not so relevant. And I think the CTMP, we wanted to go a bit further because of how important that arch is. So we could have lumped it in with the CTMP and said, please give us details of how you protect the arch as part of it. But because this one is so important, it deserved its kind of own condition and own separate report.
Okay, in which case I'm happy just, I don't think we need to include that condition for these ones, but if we say CTMP, if we approve the permission tonight, CTMP to come back to committee, and we'll ask the director to include the CTMP for number 1. I had one more question. yeah, we heard about ground stability issues. How can we be confident that that won't be an issue, won't cause problems for neighbours during construction?
That's an important part of CL7, our basements policy and the basements SPD. So with the application, we've got a construction method statement that explains how it can be built safely, done by a professional engineer. We've also got conditions on there to make sure the work is overseen and managed by a structural engineer as well. There's also other means, such as the party wall agreement for people that share a boundary with the site. I know the speaker referred to the church nearby. It doesn't have a party wall, so wouldn't have that same degree of protection, but the basement is wholly underneath the application property, so it's not extending out into the rear garden or towards that boundary in any way.
Okay, but in terms of ground stability for the neighbour, the protections are that there is a chartered engineer appointed who has to sign this off and put sort of his or her career on the line, that it doesn't cause issues.
Yes, absolutely. And we also have the Council's Code of Construction Practice as well, where we will monitor the works, and neighbours will have a kind of line to the Council in terms of the actual build period. So that condition is on there too.
Sorry, in terms of sustainable drainage, I notice, I think it's condition 9 is in there, isn't it? Requiring a sustainable urban drainage scheme to be proposed before planning can be exercised.
Yes, that's a pre-commencement condition, so they will have to improve the runoff as part of this development. So quite often when it's just, if they were just doing the mansard and the basement, we wouldn't be able to secure an improvement to the runoff because it would be under the same footprint as existing. But because this is whole-scale development, we have an opportunity to get a better result from the site, so we will expect an improvement as part of that, the details for number 9.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions? Yes, Councillors Videniak and then Councillor Idris.
Thank you. So officers are clear that the site isn't considered to contribute positively to the surrounding conservation area. But do you have any comments on the height specifically? Because surely the conservation area is not only about the external facade, but the original buildings were a particular height, which contributes to the really contributes to the beauty of the Mews. And you walk in, and the buildings are they're not originally tall terrace buildings on the western side. So what sort of, how have you factored that into your considerations around whether this is in keeping with conservation area? And obviously it also prevents a sense of sort of enclosure from forming.
Yeah, that's a key consideration, the visual impact and the amenity impact of that additional height. When considering that, we've turned to the 2019 appeal, where the inspector considered, the scheme in the round and concluded that a mansard would be acceptable in both visual and amenity terms, and we've given substantial weight to that. So whilst it's lapsed, the context hasn't changed. There's other Mews properties with mansards. So in terms of the overall bulk, height and massing, which are key planning considerations for members this evening, we're very comfortable that it relates to others within that Mews and would not be harmful overall.
Even though the original building in a conservation area, even though it might be neutral in terms of how beautiful it is, the height isn't sort of enough of a consideration to...
Yeah, through you, Chairman. The original buildings would have been garages, we believe, on the back of the flats that are behind. So these aren't sort of historic. There was never a building there sort of years ago. So it's already at a height where it wouldn't have been many years ago. So now to increase the height to relate to the buildings within that Mews, we believe it does preserve the conservation area, but it's a key consideration for members.
And one other quick...
I think the key point on that is that this, not a similar incident, but this exact same instance has gone and been tested by the inspectorate, who is effectively a sort of higher court than we are, and they've ruled that it is acceptable. And so if we were to sort of go back to them again, their answer will be the same again. I think that's the sort of main point here. Councillor Idris.
Well, my question was answered amongst...
Any further questions for officers? No? Okay, in which case we must proceed to a vote. Can you just summarise quickly the changes we've made to what's in front of us?
Yes, from your discussions, I think the key points would be that you would like the CTMP to come back to committee on number 2A, and we can talk about 2B as we decide it. And you'd also like us to bolster condition 17 relating to materials to ensure that bricks are used rather than brick slips.
Absolutely. Okay, so colleagues, clear on what we're voting on. We're just voting on 2A for the moment because 2B is technically a separate planning application. So what's in front of us with those slight amendments that we just heard, the recommendation is to grant. I'm just going to do it by a show of hands. Can I see all those in favour? 2 in favour. All those against? 3. So planning permission is refused, 3 to 2. We now need to vote on a reason. Can someone please propose a reason?
Demolishing, and as it's a conservation area, we should do everything in our power to conserve, as opposed to, demolish. Also, I don't know if you can put this into a condition, but it's, I get the feeling the applicant isn't very sure what they're quiet doing. And
So I think I'm hearing the main reason is the sort of environmental concerns and the sort of embedded carbon, the sort of carbon emission considerations in destroying a building rather than reusing it. I wonder if our officers could help us phrase that in the...
If I could just pick up on other things that you've discussed. Obviously, there's been concern around height, design, and so on. I would advise you, given that permission has been granted for one Lexham Mews to be redeveloped, that's the adjoining building, that we are careful with the concerns that we raise in light of that very recent decision, if we think about risk and appeal outcomes. So thinking about the concerns that you've raised, it is around the replacement building, and you may want to think a little bit more about that as opposed to the environmental concerns. Well, they are important, but in terms of kind of consistency in decision making, that's not a concern that we've raised with the next door building.
So if you're happy, would you agree with Lisa Chung's summary there? And if so, would you like officers to propose wording around that?
That'd be good.
Could Lisa or Fiona, could one of you propose wording? Yeah.
The members should be...
Okay, so can you, so we'll get, that's fine. So could the members who voted against, having heard the advice, but really sort of based on your reasons for voting against, propose a reason, because we all need to vote on a reason.
Say that none of us is convinced that it will have a positive contribution on the conservation area.
And I don't see the point of demolishing a building if you can configure it.
So it doesn't protect or enhance the conservation area, and the secondary reason of environmental concerns of not reusing a building. But okay, can we give? Are we able to give 2 reasons?
So it would be along the lines of the first one would be the replacement dwelling by virtue of its height, mass. But is there anything in particular about the new dwelling in its place that doesn't preserve or enhance?
Idea of demolishing something to build something different.
Well,
Considering
just
what
on the first point
what's
of protecting or enhancing So what does not protect or enhance the conservation area? Is it the height and mass, the sense of enclosure?
The height, the mass, the sense of enclosure, and the fact that you're demolishing a perfectly good building to build a new one.
Okay, well, I think that final point is a separate reason.
Well, I'm just wondering whether it would be easier to put it as one, actually. So, and I'm speaking out loud without having thought about it for any great detail, but it would be the replacement building by virtue of its design, mass, bulk. Sense of enclosure is a different one. I mean, I think you're talking more about living conditions, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Would fail to preserve or enhance, and it's not been sufficiently demonstrated that the demolition and rebuild of this building, something along those lines. So we do tie them in together, and it's around failure to demonstrate or justify demolition, and actually that the replacement dwelling is not good enough, to put it bluntly, to warrant the demolition of the existing property. That's what I would suggest we go for, listening to your concerns.
Yeah.
So could one of you propose that? Yeah, and a seconder? Yeah, so Councillor North to propose that, Councillor Zvedeniuk to second. So we now put that reason to refuse to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? So that's 3-2 passed as the reason to refuse. Okay, so planning permission is refused for 2A. So we now proceed to 2B. Presumably do we have another presentation, or do we just go straight to a vote because we've discussed it already?
I think we should have another, I'll try and be as short as I can.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
I'll focus on the issues. So number 2B, Lexham Mews. There is a typo actually in the addendum report, so I apologise for that, that says there's 19 objections. There isn't. There's 4 objections, including the one in the addendum report. So just to clarify that. Again, just turning to the slides, if they'll catch up. Its planning permission is for the demolition of the property, the erection of a mansard roof and a new basement extension. So the mansard, again, 2019 approved, the basement, again, 2019 approved, and the demolition similar to number 1 that was recently approved by the Planning Applications Committee. I'm just waiting for the slides to, here we are, to catch up. This one hasn't been to committee before because we were still just checking some outstanding information relating to windows. But again, sorry, that's the approval at number 1. I'm just trying to find the correct slide for you. I'm actually going to use the slide from here just for ease of reference. So officers are recommending approval as we think it will preserve the conservation area for the reasons explained previously and given the appearance of the existing building. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions? No? In which case we'll proceed to a vote. But first I should say, can we add the same conditions and amendments that we did to the previous application?
Yes, thank you for clarifying, Chairman. We can.
Presumably colleagues are happy with us adding those. Yeah. So in which case we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is in favour of granting planning permission. Can I see all those in favour? All those against? So planning permission is not granted, 3-2. I'm assuming the same reasoning as the previous case. Can I have a proposer? Councillor North and a seconder. Councillor Idris to second. So all those in favour of that reasoning? All those against? So that reason is adopted, 3-2, and planning permission is not granted. Right, we now move to number 8, Queenstown Walk. And I should say thank you to both parties who came and spoke on the previous case. 8 Queenstown Walk, back over to you, Ms. Ray.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So again, draw members' attention to the addendum report because we've received 2 additional objections. Turning to the size, this application is for a discharge of a condition. on the Mews property just off Queenstown Road, number 8 Queenstown Walk. So planning permission was granted on the 20th of April for a new basement, some demolition work, some extensions and alterations to this Mews property. And within that, when granting that permission, members requested that the CTMP came back to committee for determination, and we have also received enough objections to bring it to you this evening. So when considering the construction traffic management plan to which this condition relates, the full reason is in paragraph 4.2 of our report, but the reason for attaching that condition is to minimise the impact of construction, and that's within the context of our planning legislation, as planning permission has already been granted for the development. So the vehicles to be used in the construction are proposed to arrive along the main routes in the usual way we would expect, with left turns as far as practically possible, which it can be achieved on this site, and then reversing down into the Mews outside the site. All the papers are within your pack, and all the site setup plans as well, but the setup would retain a 3-metre gap between the front of the site to allow for vehicles to continue passing, and we've got traffic tracking info that you would have seen within your pack. The method proposed is a weight and load method using narrow-bodied vehicles that would park outside the site against the hoarding and use a conveyor to take the spoil out and put into it. I've included a table within the presentation just to show members the kind of the phases. They're suggesting it's going to take approximately 12 months to construct, with the first phase being about 6 months. And for each day within that first phase, there would be a vehicle arriving most days, so 5 times a week, and dwelling for 30 to 40 minutes. Access, as I said, will be retained. The pedestrian footway across the road will be retained, but there will be a vehicle there and suspended bays during that time. The number of bays proposing to be suspended would be 3, but they are necessary given the site constraints, as you would have seen in the pack. We've received a number of objections to the CTMP relating to the width of the roadway, so our transport colleagues went out and just double-checked that clearance, and there's some images of the tape measure out on the road, so we have checked that 3-metre clearance, and we can confirm that it's 5.15 metres at the widest point, and that the tracking information in your pack that shows the Skoda Octavia, you can see the width of that kind of general sized vehicle is about 1.5, so that 3-metre distance is sufficient for vehicles to park. And we note the preference for that residents have made for a handbagging and hand digging, but officers are recommending approval for the method in front of us, and our highways team have noted the benefits of reducing the overall build period and raised concerns with a potential hand dig because of health and safety implications. So officers are recommended that the condition is discharged, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we've got 3 people registered for the objectors, Ian Tegner or Tanya, Vanessa Bartolovich and Rachel Palmer. Are you with us this evening? Yes,
I'm
hello.
Ian Tyner, and Vanessa is going to make the presentation for us.
Vanessa's making the presentation. Okay, very good. Well, give me 1 second. And then you can, because you're all registered to speak, you can all participate in the Q&A afterwards. Whenever you're ready.
The Northern Conservation Society and residents of Queenstown Walk are extremely concerned by this CTMP submitted under Condition 10. This CTMP fails on the following grounds. It inaccurately reflects location, a restricted cul-de-sac, prevents access for emergency vehicles and other nearby projects, posing a danger to life, gives no consideration to the fragility of properties with a clear disregard for hand digging, is a breach of living conditions under policy CL5 with residents immensely impacted, has no contractor input, so timelines are hearsay. The highway at this location is too narrow for the construction traffic proposed, and as requested in the application form, it is very questionable whether a safe pedestrian route remains open and the roadway passable. The 3D visual at page 10 shows vehicles 3 times smaller than the reality of 4 metres. Such manipulation of imagery is misleading and raises concern this reflects the applicant's general approach. Construction vehicles have to mount and overhang fragile pavements unacceptable in a conservation area and to the safety of residents who hold Article 8 rights under the Human Rights Act of 1998. This CTMP offers no solution should other projects take place along the Mews, nor allow for residents at the low end to park and access their properties safely. Moreover, emergency vehicles will be unable to reach the elderly families or attend to fires, posing substantial risk to life and property. This is wholly unacceptable. Input from a lead contractor is a prerequisite to the approval of this condition, thus it is questionable why it has already been approved. There is no reference to near full demolition waste, which will be substantive in quantum and supports concern the document is misleading. The extremely fragile nature of this terrace, with party walls of only 1 brick thick, causes cause for waste to be removed by hand and transported off-site by vehicles suited to a restricted cul-de-sac. Condition 4 and 6 address construction matters, however this must not excuse detail under condition 10, as all conditions are of equal legal weight against the permission. Residents should not be impacted by environmental factors such as vibration, noise and dust, and this is a breach of CL5 of the local plan, and as such the above substantive material breaches in policy including CL5, misleading content, Article 8 rights and a risk to life, the CTMP should be refused and all concerns addressed and resubmitted. Thank you for your time.
15 objections plus 45 before reflect deep concerns, rate damage and danger from unprecedented traffic size and volume. Proposed large servicing vehicles can't even meet the 3-meter rule without jeopardizing site workers' safety. I live in an adjoining house. Only hand digging can be used safely between these fragile, stable walls, and the condition requires all practical measures must be taken to reduce the construction impact on neighbouring residents along the walk. Memory is still raw of...
Could I just ask you to conclude? Sorry, we've reached 3 minutes.
Can I finish that sentence?
Yes, please do.
Memory is still raw of the CTMP failures, which when only the single basement constructed in the walk in 2009 was constructed, there were great failures of the CTMP then because of the traffic.
Thank you very much. And as I said, there'll be plenty of opportunity to explore that further in questions. And for the applicant, are we joined by Tim Anton and Paul Mew? Are you both speaking, or are you going to share the time?
I will be. Pardon, Arne, I will be speaking.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, I'll give you the objectives ran slightly over, so if you want to run over by about 20 seconds, that would be fine. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors, and dear Ian, Muriel, and Rachel. My name is Tim Anton. I'm the owner and occupier of 8 Queenstown Walk, together here with my wife, Francine Ackerman. Also here today is Paul Mew, who developed the CTMP and is available for any questions you may have later. Back in April, this committee granted us permission to remodel our house so our family with 3 young children can continue to live in the borough for years to come. During the meeting, we were asked to report back to this committee with our final CTMP and our efforts to minimize the impact of the construction works upon highway safety and nearby residents. As you may know, Queenstown Walk is a cul-de-sac street with in total 14 houses. Some residents in our street are elderly, so real care needs to be taken for their health and when mitigating the construction impact. Today, I hope to share how we have incorporated further enforceable measures to address our neighbors' concerns and have taken all practical actions to mitigate the impact from our proposed construction. We would ask for your kind support for the CTMP. Our plan proposes a considerate and effective way to manage construction traffic in the street and to minimize the impact on residents, meeting all of the applicable policies and guidelines. Back in April, our original draft CTMP was deemed acceptable by the Council, including the method of spoil removal and concrete supply, as well as parking suspensions. On the request of this committee, we worked closely with our neighbors to listen more to their concerns and take meaningful steps to protect their well-being. Our traffic consultant met in person with neighbors and the chairman of the Residents Association, Alongside, I personally had several discussions to explain what we are doing and how we can help to address their concerns. All feedback has been incorporated in the proposed final CTMP with further practical measures defined. Examples include repositioning of the conveyor belt to reduce noise, reducing dust by enclosing the electric conveyor belt with a timber frame and installing a chute down to the vehicle, covering the muck-away vehicles when leaving the site, and installing a gully protection system to keep the street clean. Queenstown Walk is a special place, but it's not unique in the sense that, like 4 other mews, you can in fact organize for traffic and construction impact to be appropriately managed with a well-written plan. It's good to remind the committee a basement has been built before in the street, and number 10 Queenstown Walk was recently constructed from the ground up. The contractor we plan to work with was responsible for that reconstruction, knows the challenges on site, and is very familiar with the logistics and I would say the neighbors in the street. We recognize there are further requests from our neighbors for the CTMP. However, after detailed evaluation, the remaining proposed solutions are not in compliance with relevant policies, generate more dust, or will rather lengthen the duration of the works or increase traffic in the street.
Could I just ask you to conclude, sorry?
I will conclude, thank you. The committee can be assured that our work to appropriately manage the impact from construction on our neighbors is not yet done. The effort will continue throughout the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, questions to applicants or objectors? Councillor Ali.
The first question is to the applicants.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
My first, okay, I'll get close to the mic. My first question is to the applicant. I understand you want to make life comfortable for your family, which is your right to do so, but not the expenses of our residents in total and the neighbors. One of the objectors has mentioned in its objection written point that missing 2 years of the parking pay, the parking, you know, residents parking for missing out for 2 long years will be unacceptable. And at one point, it mentioned if, you know, with the council's suggestion that residents can park during the night, providing that they come up in the morning and get it. Someone may not feel okay to wake up that morning and to drive. So what can be done about that, rather than just thinking about your own development? What can be done about that to mitigate on that situation where it comes to the car park? And the residents, obviously there will be dust, pollution and all that involved, but the car park, I believe, is one of the most essential for especially elderly residents who cannot park their cars far away from where they live and they have to use that access. That's the first question to you.
Thank you for that question. We understand this is a really important point for our neighbors, and it's actually one of the things where we have had frequent conversations about. Just to kind of set the scene, Queenstown Walk has in total 11 permit parking holder spaces for 14 homes in total, and we're lucky that most of us can park right in front of their house. To maintain safe traffic movement in line with the policies that the RBKC request, we are needing to suspend at times 15 meters, that is 3 parking spots in the street. It's good to note that even when all the 3 mandated spaces are suspended, there are still 8 parking opportunities remaining in the street, and by my last count, that is more than there are cars owned by residents in the street. That's not to say that we have every incentive to limit the amount of suspension that we will need to allow the traffic to move freely in the street. As the committee will appreciate, we have the parking suspensions, in fact, are quite costly, and we will make sure that we will use them sparingly, and wherever possible, informally arrange the access to the street, as we have done so many times before.
Do you have another question there?
Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. To the residents in the area, understanding that the development of the council obviously has been recommended to grant this application form. But as you've seen before, the councillor sitting here will make the final decision, and then obviously there was a appeal process. What makes you to work with residents who wants to improve? As a residents, we would like to make sure that the residents and the developers and the objectives work together. What can make your life is easier for this project to go ahead? What about the car park or anything else that you feel if we were to grant this evening for the application, that you can work with residents and then reach a conclusion so that all will benefit rather than just one resident's objection for the sake of objecting?
With respect, if I may speak on with the residents.
Would you mind moving your... Sorry, would you mind moving your microphone? Yeah.
As planning chair of the Conservation Society, I speak with the residents on a number of times, and I've listened to their concerns. And I think that your question is not really reflecting the other grounds that have been raised here. So just asking about parking is not really a single consideration. The other grounds need to be taken into consideration too. And I think the fact that this is a cul-de-sac is very important too. And the fact that if you have a fire at the end of the cul-de-sac, how is a fire truck going to get there? How would the ambulance get there with the elderly residents to save their lives? You know, there are human rights.
Sorry, if I just interrupt very quickly, I apologise. I mean, the question about parking was one question. That's not to say that will by any means be our only question. But the question Councillor Ali just asked was, is there anything we could do that wouldn't necessarily make it acceptable to you, but would improve the application and make your lives better if we were to grant?
Well, certainly the hand digging is a very important issue because the vehicles are huge coming in, and they're flush against the hoarding in this. Now, the workers will not be able to exit and enter the site when anything is being transferred to trucks, and and the vibration on the walls of our houses, which were stables, and some of them I've experienced the development at number 10, and great hunks of the bricks have fallen out and stuffed with bits of concrete. It is not a properly built wall, and the vibration from that will be very, very serious. And we've never had a mechanical digging in the street.
Okay.
Anything
Well,
except big.
Yeah, I mean,
aspects.
it was mentioned in the presentation, but we will explore hand digging again with officers in the next section, and certainly the concerns around vibrations and damage. Do you have another question? Yes, Councillor Ali, go ahead. Sorry, I think we are...
Yep, now it's working. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for that clarification. Yes, I've started my questions with the car park and the parking pay, but my other question was, is there anything else that can be done? And thank you for mentioning to hand dig and the structural engineers to come in. As someone who's done geology for my first degree, I understand the importance of structural geology and make sure that the properties that have been built will not damage the next properties, so that we will not pay the price of that. That's the reason I've asked. And I think it's important for us to understand when we're making decisions, we don't make decisions on one issue. We have to make decisions on holistic issues, not just one. So I appreciate for making that clear. And Chair, I will ask the same question with the officers, but I'll finish it here. Thank you.
Colleagues, other questions? Yes, Councillor Svedenic.
Thank you. A question for the objectors. I notice in some of the comments, although there's less detail in the actual report, that there was a redevelopment of number 11, and there have been a few number 11, a redevelopment, and there have been a few comparisons to that. So only one parking bay was suspended for the redevelopment of number 11. It lasted 16 months, etc. So noting that it's a very narrow cul-de-sac, I'm just one, and obviously it would have been a different development. I don't know the details of that one, but what about that traffic management plan made that development more bearable, and can any of those things be applied to the plan we're discussing today?
Is
that just to check, is that a question to the objectors? Yeah.
Yeah, that was the objection I mentioned. It was 2008, and the construction was over 2 years. It's very small, with a one-bedroom house was rebuilt. A very small addition of this large project here we're looking at. There is a long objection from the owner of number 12, who has lived there for many, many years, and it works from home there as a younger person. And they had a CTMP, and the situation was horrific, and residents apparently congregated in the streets.
I would be happy to help my neighbours out if that's
sorry.
okay.
Okay. One second. We might come to you in a moment, but sorry, just let the lady finish.
Well, I can't remember. I take court in mid-system.
Yeah.
Well, they did end up with much smaller vehicles, and they did end up with only one space, where because okay, well, and they certainly didn't use a chute, so they had many adjustments following that. But that was in easier times, I'd say, back in the noughties.
Understood. And Councillor Zvedenia, would you like to put the same question to the applicant?
Thank you. And it's obviously something we've closely looked at and have discussed with our neighbours. We're actually improving in terms of protection of dust and noise from that particular development. The difference with the situation at our next door house is that the parking bay basically ends in front of the house, so there's no need to suspend more parking slots, and it's a free road basically from at the end of the street. That is the difference, and that makes it possible to only suspend one parking bay. Clearly, I have no intention or interest to suspend more parking bays than required. And I would remind the committee that we have committed in our CTMP that the driver is at all times available at the vehicles. So would there be a situation when another vehicle needs to pass, that would always be possible. So I think that's another important factor to remember.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions for the applicants about the CTMP. So the first one is, we've been told that there'll be 3 metre clearance at all times, even when there's a vehicle parked there. And what I want to know is, how much leeway does that allow? Because sometimes on paper, I'm not necessarily talking about this application, but on paper people assume a lorry driver is always going to park, you know, on a dime and without a millimetre difference, whereas in reality that's never going to happen. So how much leeway? So I think it's 5.15 metre gap, need to keep 3 metre clearance, so that leaves you 2.15 metres, and how much leeway is there within that?
Yes, the lorry is 1.9 metres wide, and it has wing mirrors, but they can be pulled in to get closer to the site, and that would then leave 3 metres for a car to pass, and the car is typically 1.7, 1.8 metres wide, so it'd be quite a lot of leeway. Okay, but
so we're to maintain 3 metres, the 1.9 metre vehicle, so you're talking about 25 centimetres of leeway. And do you think that's realistic for a driver to keep within a 25 centimetre, within 25 centimetres of the...
We have shown the tracking in the CTMP, and there is quite a lot of room. You'll see from that tracking that, I don't know whether we can get it up, but there is a lot of leeway.
Do we have an image of...
But I think the math is the vehicle is 1.5 meters wide, and so we're allowing for 3 meters space.
So you're allowing for the hoarding too?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Your microphone's turned off. Sorry, I think we've got too many microphones on.
Thank you, thank you. So just before the public comments within your committee pack, we can put it up as well, but it's probably easier for you to see. Just before then, you've got the very last one, shows you kind of the worst case scenario, which is the concrete mixer tracking, and then a more general car example of a Skoda Octavia. So we'll bring it up now, but it's a better version of it for you.
I suppose in effect the argument is there's 25 centimetres leeway if the wing mirrors are tucked in, but also you're saying the 3 metres itself allows some leeway because an average car falls well within inside that. So I think I understand the argument. And then on vibrations, how can you convince, so we've heard about the work at number 10, which apparently caused damage, involved things falling off the other side of the wall. How can you make sure that vibrations don't dramatically affect the living conditions of neighbours?
Vibrations is a source of concern, as is dust and noise. I'm not privy to kind of what happened at number, I think it's actually 11 that we're talking about now, but anyway, the measures we have taken is first of all to use, in line with policies, an electric conveyor belt which significantly reduces the vibrations from the spoils being pulled up. And of course all of our work is overseen by a qualified engineer to make sure that we minimize the amount of effort required that drives vibration. Also in our method statement, which I think is beyond the scope of today's conversation, we have taken all necessary measures to detach our property from our neighbors, which again reduces vibration, but I think that's beyond the point of today's conversation.
Okay, thank you. And my next question was around, which was brought up by objectors, around emergency vehicles. What happens if an emergency vehicle needs to get to a house at the end of the walk?
The driver will be with the vehicle at all times. The dwell time is usually about 30 to 40 minutes. But if in that time there is an emergency vehicle needs to get through, the driver would just drive off and let the vehicle through.
So the driver will presumably need to reverse back up?
Yes.
Yeah, and how long does that take?
Well, I would say a matter of 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question to the objectors. Have you had consultation with the applicant? Have you received any kind of consultation during the whole application?
I speak on behalf of the Conservation Society.
Yes.
I haven't personally been consulted. I'm the planning.
So,
residents
a residence on the street. Yeah. Have you had any consultation, any prior information about what's going to happen?
Well, certainly from my point of view, the developer has approached me. I would say it has been entirely presentation and no consultation.
Okay. My question is to the applicant. Will you consult with them? Will you negotiate with them going forward? Even if this application is approved, would you consider talking to your neighbors and just giving them the heads up more or less about things before, as and when they happen, and just having, I don't know, neighborly relation where you guys talk to each other and sort things out together?
Sorry, was that to the objectors you were asking?
The applicant.
I think this is to the applicant, and I think, sorry, I think we've got too many microphones on again.
Sorry, my microphone isn't switched on. Yes, we have one of Paul Mews' associates has come and talked to us extensively about the CTMP. I would say that it had negligible effect on the big issues. Tim has stated that on various things like the chute being moved a couple of feet to the right and that sort of thing, so that it was in the middle of the house. But what concerned me particularly is that the report in the CTMP was highly selective, and it left out several fundamental issues which we had raised, and the reasons for our raising it were simply not put into that, and that concerns me greatly.
And did you want to direct that question to the applicant as well? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I mean, we have lived in the street for 7 years, and we know our neighbors really well, and I would say, really love them. And we feel bad about kind of that, the desire for us to, make our house a place to live going forward has a direct impact on them. And throughout the process, and I think my neighbors would agree on that, we have been acting as neighborly as we can given the circumstances, meaning during the planning process, I had 30 interactions with them. During this follow-up CTMP, I had numerous interactions with them personally, and I think every possible reasonable, practical consideration that they have asked us is now in the CTMP. And we will continue to do that going forward. I mean, my commitment here to the committee and to my own neighbors is that our engagement with them and our consideration and care for them doesn't stop today. It goes on throughout the entire project. We will not cut corners, not now, not later, and we have taken this approach at every point so far.
Thank you for that. Just to follow up on that, so the point around hand digging, which your neighbours wanted to be in the CTMP but isn't in the CTMP, can you explain to us why that isn't possible, to your mind?
Yes, and we actually really looked into this, because clearly it was a request from our neighbors that we wanted to kind of evaluate. We brought in our contractor, we brought in the traffic consultants, and we brought in the quantity surveyor to actually understand what this would mean. Just let me, and it's asked for in the context of reducing noise and dust, right? Let's first kind of talk about what it actually means, hand digging of spoils. It means that you dig the basement by hand and then manually back the spoils within the site perimeter, then carry by hand the spoils from 3 meters depth up into the street level, and then lift it manually again in electric vehicles, small electric vehicles as being asked for. These then transported out to a larger dumper vehicle waiting outside of the street. We don't think that method is effective in reducing noise or dust, nor is the safe option, and will rather increase traffic in the street. And if you allow me, I'm happy to walk you through why we think that is the case.
Yes, I mean, don't take 20 minutes, but if you can do it in a couple of minutes, that would be great.
Simple. First, smaller vehicles involved increase traffic in the street and increase the duration of the work. Our quantity surveyor thinks 3 times more trips are required, twice as long for the duration of the work. Second, additional manual handling actually increases dust, as the bags needed to be lifted several times. It defeats the purpose of the ask. And lastly, all the heavy-duty work involved effectively is not in compliance with the Council's HSC policies, nor with CDM 2015, which is simply put, they're unsafe. The Council's requirements are very clear that manual bagging can only be allowed if no other options are available. That is not the case.
Okay. Yes, Councillor North. Thank you, by the way.
Thank you. to the applicant. You have a big tall order here. You have the local resident association objecting. You have local residents objecting. You have a very narrow mews in which to carry out this application. Just picking up on what you just said about the hand digging option, if it's without the hand digging, the time to take from start to finish, and with the hand digging start to finish, could you just remind us of what that would be?
So our current program takes 26 weeks for all the scheduled works. And then there's another 6 to 7 months of fit out, which is internal stuff that in a way has very different effect. The high level estimates, and I think Paul can talk more about kind of the council's experience with manual digging, would suggest that the trips increase and the duration of the work more than double because of the additional handling. I don't know, Paul, if you have to add anything about manual digging.
Sorry, just before you answer, can I add in, if you're able to make any, because we're talking about this in very binary terms, but if there's any hybrid option where you take the noisiest machinery and replace that, but maybe don't make the whole thing, you know, hand done.
The conveyor itself is powered by electric motors, so it's quite quiet. Also, bear in mind that we've done something like 24 CTMPs in RBKC in the last sort of 3 years, and all of them have had conveyor belts. And it's very much the preferred method because it's quicker and it's quieter and it's cleaner and gets the job done quicker.
And what about the machinery used to do the digging? The machinery that causes, no expert in this, but that causes the greatest level of vibrations and dust in the air. Have you looked at what can be done to reduce that?
I think this is a question for the contractor, but I would imagine that in this sort of nearer to the external walls, I mean, hand digging could be possible to minimise vibration, and then obviously the spoil would be loaded onto the conveyor and up to the top of the conveyor and into the truck. So where there's an issue with potential vibration, I think hand digging could be an alternative.
Okay. Well, we're sort of digging quite deep into the detail here, more so than we normally do at this committee. But I think it might be worth exploring with officers, you know, if we can look into some sort of special treatment right next to the walls, especially given how fragile they are.
My question is really to try to get a bottom line for clarity. How much longer with this? I mean, we're talking about a 2 year to 3 year build period. I'm just conscious that the objectors have already had a very long build period with another neighbour. The thought of a 2 or 3 year build period would make a difference to me personally. So I'm just trying to find out how long is it going to take without the hand digging, and how long would it take less if you added in the hand digging?
Could I just highlight that there's no principal contractor appointed, so all the timelines are completely hearsay at the moment, even the option by the conveyor belt. So I think that would need further investigation by the applicant.
Well, that's why my question is, rather than hearsay, could we hear from the...
Sorry, your question's to the applicant.
My question's to the applicant first, yes. I'll ask the objectors just after.
I'm not quite sure why it is stated that no principal contractor is appointed. It is in fact appointed. So, and that is the same contractor who has done the work before. And just to kind of clarify, no basements was built recently. The only house that was rebuilt is number 10, which is 2 doors down.
I think we're going slightly off topic. So the question is, you want to know, just clarify the difference in the length, estimated length of construction period of the 2 different methods discussed, the proposed method and the hand digging method, roughly.
Well, in fact, we don't know because it never happens in the borough, first of all. And second, when I asked the question to a quantity surveyor, he smiled and said at minimum twice as long. And I think it defeats the purpose of the effort.
So then my follow-up question to the applicants is, are you sure that you would want them to go down the route of a hand digging process if it meant double the time for this construction to go ahead?
I would say the 2 considerations are to improve the living conditions of the residents under CL5, but also the fact that the fragility of the party walls must be taken into consideration. Would you like to?
As I understand it, the condition which was placed on the CTMP was to ensure that the construction impact on neighbouring residents was minimised. We believe that this digging and bagging would minimise the impact. I agree, I accept that it would take longer. I don't know, I can't tell how much longer, but that is why we believe that this is one practical measure which could reduce the impact, the horrendous impact of this immense project on neighbours.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'd just like to say that that it is the vibration and the walls, and they are so thin and with holes in.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult. The number 10 actually took 6 years overall to get sorted, and eventually it was well managed for a small amount of disruption. This is turning into a total rebuild with a basement under it, floor lowering from the roof to 5 meters down. This is a very big project, and it will take a very long time. I've sat through quite a lot of projects.
Understood. Thank you. Colleagues, any other questions? Are you ready to move to the next section of the meeting? Okay, well, thank you all very much for your time. We now move to the next section, which is questions to officers. And I just want to start on that point of the fragility of the walls. And is there some sort of slight hybrid, well, two questions, I suppose. To what extent is it within our purview, seeing as we're just looking at the CTMP? And secondly, if we can rule on it, is there any hybrid solution where right next to the walls the digging could be done differently?
I think the key focus is that it is the CTMP that's in front of you. So the actual methods and so on inside the property, I would strongly suggest you don't go down that route. Some of the members may be familiar with the costs we lost against us on 7 Lincoln Street when we tried to go that far about what kind of tools they used and exactly how they did it, and they got a full awards of costs against us. So there's a real risk there if you go into that much detail. We also need to look at it in the context of policy CL7 being a permissive policy. This is not a restrictive policy. We're very clear about basements. It's not that they are unacceptable in principle. There are challenges with any development project. So there's challenges with basements and smaller scale seams, as the neighbours absolutely correctly identify. And I really, really sympathise with them. And I've met with them myself to discuss those concerns. But the one bonus we have is with this application is we've moved on a lot. So the basement that was allowed at number 11 Queenstown Walk was back in December 2008 when all these issues around basements were far worse because members hadn't gone and got all these extra provisions we have now. And even at number 10, that was on a different development and at a different time. On this one, we have the CTMP, which you're considering now. We also have the Code of Construction Practice, where we get to monitor the work, and that's put forward. So there are other things in place. The hand dig solution, I mean, it sounds like it will be better to neighbours, but we have to remember that is going to significantly extend the build time. And I think, to be honest, even double maybe, it depends on how they do it, but with small electric vehicles, if we're talking about cars and you think about the amount of spoil and the tonnage that's identified within the CTMP and calculated, that's going to be substantial. And the references to it being a 2-year build, in the objectors' concerns, because in the concerns it says 2 years is going to be too long. Well, this is proposed at a year, and a hand dig solution is likely to be at least 2. So I'm concerned that we have to balance. It is disruptive. Basement development is disruptive. We don't shy away from that, and we understand that, but we have to only go as far as we can under planning permission in the context of lots of case law, lots of appeals when we've explored these things before. And I think this solution is kind of the best one for the site for speed, even if I just think a basement isn't going to be popular down a small Mews street.
Thank you, that's helpful, and I think it's clear that specifying types of tools used in different parts of the construction would be beyond the authority of this committee, but hopefully the applicant has heard this evening, as probably has previously, the sincere concerns around the fragility of the walls, and we'll hopefully take that on board, and if the CTMP is granted, we'll seek to do whatever is possible to minimise any and hopefully eliminate any damage or vibrations to those fragile walls. Colleagues, yes, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. My question to the officers is, I understand we cannot ask for what material will be used inside and machineries, but the question residents have mentioned is specifically the damage that it may or potentially cause to their properties, and that is a responsibility that we have to deal with. So is there any way we can monitor or find out in advance so the machineries that have been used will not cause any damage now or the long term for the adjacent property, for the properties next to it? That's one question. My second one follow-up is immediately, I also understand we cannot enforce that if we were to grant this application for the applicant to work closely with the neighbours, and I hope he will work with the neighbours, the applicant will do, but is there any way we can see oversight on that so that we understand both the applicants and the objectors are working closely? And I wouldn't ask you for a complaint application form, but is there any way they can work with together as officers can oversee in the long-term process?
So through you, Chairman, the structural stability and all those issues are dealt with under the Party Wall Act, so it's separate to planning. So you can't take that into consideration, damage to neighbouring properties and so on. There's a separate legislation for that. But with regard to ongoing engagement, what we're approving is the CTMP that's in the pack, that document. If they deviate from it, we have planning enforcement powers to serve a breach of condition notice or other means at our disposal. And then separately, even beyond the CTMP, we have that code of construction practice. So if neighbours are concerned about excessive noise, or if they're concerned about the quality of the build work or any of those things, they can call our dedicated construction management team to come. And that line is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that is markedly different to what happened when number 11 had permission in 2008, because none of that was there, the construction management team.
Any further questions, colleagues? Okay, well, we've discussed this at length, and I thank both parties for being here this evening and being very forthcoming in your answers. We have to proceed to a vote, remembering that planning permission is obviously already granted. We're just voting on the construction traffic management plan. So the recommendation is to grant. I'll just do a show of hands. Can I see all those in favour? So the CTMP is granted unanimously. Thank you all very much. How long have we been going for? 2 hours. Does anyone need a quick break before we move on to... Yeah? It's up to you. We're through all... Okay, we're proceeding to 51 Millman Street. Thank you, thank you.
Good evening, Chairman, Councillors and all. I'll be presenting 51 Millman Street. Planning Commission is requested for the first and second story rear extension on the primary building and rebuilding and also a rear extension and first story extension on the secondary building, also known as the garage. Additional permission is sought under the same application for building refurbishments, as well as resurfacing, landscaping and drainage works. The property is at the south part of the borough. Here is an aerial view. You'll note in the following image that a lot of the trees have been removed. Now here's the property more or less currently. The trees were removed as they didn't require planning permission, and this was checked with our team. As you can see, the property is in a bit of disrepair and it's looking to be redeveloped. Here we have the existing on the left, proposed on the right. Above the garage, you can see in more faint grey an extension, a first story extension, and also we can see the dormer windows on the front facade. The rear elevation, you can, on the right hand image we can see the back of the garage extension, and on the right hand part of the right image we can see the first and second floor extensions. Here it becomes more clear. The second and first story extensions are recessed, and also the rear of the garage extension is recessed. There are no windows looking towards the southern boundary or over the rear western boundary from the extensions. As a result, on the property we will have a small increase in the building footprint. To offset that, there is a green roof on the garage extension as well as landscaping. Now, also bring your attention to the recommended conditions. To address some matters of landscaping, we have a tree and landscaping detailed condition recommended, as well as a sustainable urban drainage system, or a SUDS condition recommended, as well as a code of construction practice, which we've heard a lot about. And I'll also bring your attention to the addendum, which includes minor formatting corrections and the addition of the full environmental health no objection comment. That'll end the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the objectors, are we joined by Isis, Dove, Edwin and David Waddell? Apologies. And are you sharing the time, or is one of you sharing the time? Okay. Well, excuse me. As with previous cases, you've got 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chairman and committee members. I speak on behalf of my family. We've been local residents for well over a decade at 103 Cheney Walk, and we are only objecting to the first floor extension that fills the townscape gap next to our home to accommodate the 5th bedroom. I've submitted some photographs in the addendum, and you can see that we're already surrounded by a high wall to the south and a building opposite. And even trees that weren't structurally problematic, although they were definitely untended, have been removed from the gap in the southeast side to accommodate the extension. So in place of that, we now have a 2-story wall which runs down almost the full length of our garden, and genuinely it will enclose and box in our garden to the very harmful detriment of our amenity. And the wall's also apparent from and overbearing from our living room. So in the pack, there were no scaled elevation drawings. No one's come and visited us to see what the impact of just this particular element of the building is. So we respectfully ask you to reject or defer the application, really, or to remove that harmful extension. And it's not just NIMBYism, because we also share the concerns about the impact to the wider amenity. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to David.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you very much for allowing me to object to this application. I speak as chairman of the Cheney Walk Trust, which is a local large residents association for the Chelsea Riverside, about 200 members, and secondly as a member of the council of the Chelsea Society. The Trust and the Chelsea Society specifically is concerned to protect the integrity and setting of the designated Cheney Conservation Area. The applicant has submitted a planning statement which refers to guidance provided by Policy C11 on conservation area impact. However, they have not drawn attention to RBKC's Cheney Conservation Area appraisal, which at sections 211 to 215 addresses the importance of gaps in the conservation area. And I quote, if I may, as the area has a densely built-up character, any space between buildings is likely to be extremely valuable in creating breathing space in the townscape and creating a particular setting for the surrounding buildings. And secondly, in some places, gaps allow views across back gardens to rear elevations, and some gaps are over single or more rarely two-story structures. Some gaps contain trees or views of plants, but others are simply space between the masonry looking towards the sky. Now, the significant point is that the gap over the Millman Street facade of 103 Cheney Walk, which is immediately next to the 51 Millman Street, is highlighted specifically in the Cheney Conservation Area appraisal on the map at figure 2.2 as, and I quote, an important townscape gap. So I'm saying it's very specifically designated. It's not, even though it is just on the border of the conservation area. Yeah. The applicant, to our mind, has not taken account of this guidance.
Could you summarise, please, now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. We understand that the council is required to take account of the impact of development on the setting of the conservation area. And we believe this has not been done, and therefore we ask you to reject the application as it stands.
Thank you very much. And are we joined by Andrew Hodgson and Phil Jones? Hello. And are you both speaking? Were you? Right. And you've got 3 minutes, but as the objectors ran over 30 seconds, if you need an extra 30 seconds, that's fine, whenever you're ready.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. My name is Andrew Hodgson, I'm Planning Director from Pegasus Group, and I'm speaking on behalf and support of this planning application, and my colleague Phil Jones is here to answer any questions arising from members. Suffice to say, we are very happy with the officer's report, which covers all matters comprehensively. The property is currently in a poor state of repair and compromises a relatively modern building which has no architectural significance. A dilapidated garage and perspex roof and overgrown vegetation, which included a large London plane tree now removed at the front, which was causing structural damage to surrounding buildings. We have, however, decided to work with the existing property rather than go for a demolition and a rebuild. The submitted scheme has taken a very considered architectural approach to design, delivering a high-quality scheme similar to a wide number of very similar precedents in the surrounding area. The scheme seeks to mirror the L-shaped form through a side extension and a smaller rear extension, creating a balanced form of development with a central courtyard which takes full account of its relationship with adjoining properties. The proposal seeks the most efficient use of the generous, underutilised and unconstrained open space to the rear and side of the plot. From a design perspective, the scheme lends itself to an appropriately scaled rear and side two-storey extension which steps down to the single storey in order not to appear overbearing or uncharacteristic to the adjoining neighbouring gardens or the wider surrounding area. Following pre-application advice from council officers, the applicant reduced the original mass of the side and rear extensions in order to better emphasise their subservient nature and to reduce the sense of enclosure upon the neighbouring property at 103 Cheney Walk. Furthermore, a great deal of work has gone into the articulation and finish of the front street elevation in order to portray a high-quality design which will improve the building's overall aesthetic and significantly enhance its appearance in the street scene. Importantly, and is recognised within the committee report, the site does not encroach into the neighbouring conservation area and as such cannot have a harm on the conservation area gap as directed by policy C1 and CL11. The removed trees are also not within the conservation area nor subject to tree TPOs, and the tree officers confirmed their loss is acceptable subject to agreed replanting. Contrary to some objections which came through the planning application, the proposals offer no overlooking opportunities into neighbouring properties by the way of creating separation distances and careful design, which has avoided the inclusion of windows that look directly into gardens or other existing habitable areas. Furthermore, the following advice From officers, the applicant also undertook a daylight and sunlight assessment, which demonstrates there will be no loss of natural light into the neighbouring properties. Overall, the proposed development represents a high-quality design, which has been fully considered its relationship and setting with neighbours and within the street scene. It's also wholly compliant with planning policy, and we fully endorse the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, questions? Yep. Councillor Zvedeniak and then Councillor Idris.
Thank you. So I have no objections to any efforts to repair the property and to improve its overall aesthetic features. But I am a bit concerned, having looked at some of the photos that have been sent, about the proposed extension, the first floor one, which, I mean, it looks here, so in this photo, like it really does sort of box in the garden a lot. And I'm wondering, question for the applicants, and I'd like to hear from the objectors as well. I can't really see how this doesn't contribute to a sense of enclosure and won't harm, it contribute to a loss of light in the garden, the neighbour's property. So what measures have been taken to mitigate? You mentioned not having windows that overlook, but it does, it is very boxy, and I note the comments that were made by the objectors around the importance of having a gap and some space, particularly given that this is adjacent to the conservation area. So if I could hear from both applicant and objector.
Who would you like to start with?
Applicant first,
Applicant,
thank you.
Thanks. And just because I was going to ask about that, if you, yeah, and I think my colleague mentioned it, but particularly the sense of enclosure, I'd be interested
Chair,
to hear about.
My question was also going to be around that, so can I just add on
yes,
one
go
point?
ahead.
And is there any way you can consider keeping the whole design, but keep that particular bit lower, or if you bring it back to the original state where just the ground floor as opposed to the second floor?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that in the design, we've looked to keep that side extension to two-storey. We've already looked to reduce the scale of it through discussions with the planning officer. There's no... houses in that street tend to be three-storey. Obviously, the principal house in this story is three-storey. So a two-storey extension next to a property isn't unreasonable in our bit. This is only one of the gardens as well that the neighbour has. They have another garden, additional garden to the rear. Whilst that's not a major consideration, it is also a factor in the fact that this is not along their one and only garden space. But having said that, a two-storey development in this location next to a property is not unreasonable in our view. It could have been a three-storey extension of the existing house going across, but we considered that would be overbearing at 3 stories, but a single story above the garage that's existing, we don't think is unreasonable.
And did you want to put the same question to the objectors?
Yes, please.
So sorry, just to re-summarise, and also bearing in mind the applicant's comments, the sense of, can you explain to us why you think the sense of enclosure is unreasonable?
As I said, the garden, and I'll just answer or perhaps reply to having more than one garden. We do have a small patio at the back. However, you have to go down some stairs and up, so it's not accessible, and it doesn't fit a table for our family. We're a family of 6, and it doesn't have the Western aspect, and in fact that is specifically, I suppose it's east of the existing building, so it's quite shaded anyway. We do feel we'll be enclosed because, as I said, to the left, 104A Millman Street, right, is a tall building, and opposite we have a block of flats, which, as I said, I've explained, is obviously over the street, but still is elevated. And when you're sitting in the garden, I think, I appreciate that from the planning point of view, perhaps with an overall context of the borough, it may not be considered to be a large mass. However, if you're sitting in a garden right next to the wall, then I think it does take on quite a different aspect and perspective. So that's all that I would say. And, you know, I think that perhaps if someone had come to visit, or if there had even been drawings which took the perspective of our garden, then it may have either clarified it completely. You know, I'm not saying that it might not have shown that there was no overlooking, but as things stand, what we believe, it's a three-dimensional structure that's not obvious on plan view drawings that really will impact our just enjoyment of the garden. And the front garden, we do have a front garden, I accept, but that's actually pretty much on Cheney Walk, and there's no space to sit.
Understood. Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, can we see this on there, please, rather than on here, so that everyone can see on the screen? So if we can have this.
Sorry. And that's my sketch view of what I understand from the plans.
Okay.
I'll switch my thing off.
Thank you. My question to you, objectors, when I see this, I can not only see the enclosure and the impact that it may have us as a family, but also privacy. Can you tell us a bit of a privacy issue that may be included with this? And that's first question to you, and then I will come to the question to the applicant.
There are no windows, so on the new extension, so we didn't feel that we would be overlooked. And to be honest, the existing building does have windows that overlook to our garden. So this isn't, and when we bought the house, it was like that. And there's nothing that we can do about that. But the one thing is that it is set, as alluded to the gap, that particular part of the building, the elevated, I think it's 3 stories, is set back. So we completely agree that we won't be overlooked by windows from that building, and it really is just the mass of it, of just that extent. And just again, I want to be perfectly clear that it is really just that particular aspect of it. We have no problem with the rest of it. Yeah, it's not ideal, but we are honestly, that's fine.
Thank you. Can I have
Go ahead.
a follow-up question? Thank you. We've dealt with the privacy issue as the windows and everything, the neighbours. But in terms of the sense of inclusion and the box, and to the only, as they said, more accessible open space or the garden, will that be reasonable to you if you were on the other round, if they were doing the same as a resident, as the neighbours? How would you feel about it? And is there any way we can get both of you to work together and perhaps come back to the solution? But if you can answer this question, I would appreciate first.
Yeah, I understand the question, and I want to just take a step back and just say that we started off, when we bought the building, that we recognised we needed to have a sympathetic approach to whatever we were going to extend. We could have demolished the building. It's in a very, very bad state, but we wanted to ensure that we kept that house and maximised what we could, but accepting that we needed to be sympathetic because of the neighbour. We started off with exceptionally good relationships. We've been round, we've met them, we've discussed it. I would say we did try to have a conversation about our plans, but I understood that the family were busy at the time and weren't able to meet. So I think we've tried our best to do the minimum. We could have gone up to a second story, but we decided not to. And our brief to the architect was to be sympathetic and understanding of the neighbours.
Could I possibly comment on that?
David, can I just...
Sorry.
Councillor Ali,
I would like the same to, yes, comment to please.
Further question.
My further question is if the objectors could comment on this.
Sorry, I just wanted to...
Sorry, 1 second, just to be clear. Could you re-summarise your question to the objectors, please, just so we're clear?
Thank you, Chair. The same question I've asked, but his response was he's been trying to contact you and the family were busy. And in terms of understanding, and obviously when one buys property, they want to improve, and you don't object to that. But the question is what we've talked about here and what we can see from here. So could you please respond, taking his points on board, and if there is a way we can work, you and the applicant can work together on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to clarify, I had met, we went to the Chelsea Arts Club with the owner, and I've had various discussions on the phone about this. The only thing that I will say is that obviously when we met and we went and had a drink and they discussed the plans with us, I'm a lay person, so it's very, very difficult with a glossy magazine planning for me to have understood within the context of a bar exactly what was going on. And I quite specifically said, and this was within the pre-application, I very specifically said, you know, totally, it's great, they were lovely, I suggested they move in, but I did say that, you know, when with time that I looked at it and there was anything that, you know, we would object. And I also, when we put in the objection, I specifically emailed the owner as a courtesy to say that we've put in an objection. Perhaps what you're referring to is that he then asked to meet, and I was in the middle of exams for my MA and simply said, well, it's in the process. I don't think that there's probably any, you know, the process is there for that reason. And next week just isn't good for me. So we have been engaging, you know, and I will continue to engage very neighbourly. We've had, you know, we're not difficult at all, you know, at least I hope we're not. It really is just about this one element. And yeah, and we'll facilitate as much as we can in terms of the build. Sorry, David. Oh.
Understood.
Briefly, if I could just add to that.
Go ahead.
I think the application's paperwork has been somewhat disingenuous in one or two ways. For example, in regard to the conservation area, they say, they suggest that because the conservation area concern was raised by the urban design officer, rather than by an RBKC conservation officer, it may be disregarded. Now, I can't believe that's correct. And we suggest that is not successful. It's not acceptable. And then secondly, there is this point that the council is required to take account of the impact of development on the setting of the conservation area. So that's an important point. And thirdly, very briefly, in the application, paragraph 7.4, it says the single-story extension immediately adjoining the conservation area boundary that is formed by the garden wall of 103 Cheney Walk will not extend the height of that boundary wall. Well, that's highly misleading. In fact, this may be factually correct, but the wall of the actual proposed extension immediately next to it will substantially exceed the height of that garden wall. So there's no way that the height of the garden wall is being maintained. It just means they're not demolishing it. So I just, and so again, you know, the townscape gap is at risk, and that, to my mind, overwhelms, you know, a lot of other arguments, really.
Understood. Colleagues, any further questions? Yes, Councillor
Thank
Ali,
you. You've raised a very good point here. If the application was in line with the height of the garden, will that be applicable to you? Will that be okay with you?
Oh, yes, yeah. Sorry. I think you might have turned.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yes, obviously, if it was just as the wall as it is, we just felt that it was that if the new the extension is effectively sort of increasing the height of the wall. If it stays as it is and they build behind it, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Colleagues, any further questions? We'll move on to, happy for us to move on to the next stage. Well, thank you all very much. We'll move on to the next stage of the meeting. Questions to officers. And I'll start. I just want to get a bit more information over the debate around the townscape gap and the conservation area. From what I gather, the applicant is saying we're not in a conservation area, and the objectors are saying yes, but there's views into and from the conservation area, and so therefore the gap is relevant. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure, the property is not in a conservation area. However, to the south of it is a gap which is identified in the conservation area appraisal. Paragraph 610 in the officer's report considers the effects on it and finds that there will be no actual harmful effects on the character or appearance of the gap. The reason for that is that the gap will remain as identified in the appraisal, and the additional structure is only 2 stories tall, which in the broader context of the gap and the area is also weighed as being acceptable.
Okay, so we're saying the gap, because this is next to a conservation area, it is relevant, not as relevant as it would be if it was in the conservation area, but there is still some level of relevance. But because it's only 2 stories and the gap to the side of it is maintained, then overall it's acceptable. Is that?
Yes, the views in and out of the conservation area and the setting of the conservation area is a consideration under CL3.
I think that's clear. Colleagues, yes, Councillor Spadania.
The area appraisal highlighted the gap as significant to the conservation area. So that includes the gap in which we're proposing to build. Is that correct? Or is it
the development is not within the gap?
Sorry?
The development is not within the gap. Sure. I can show you on the slide. Ooh. One moment. Okay. So the red line shows the subject site. To the south of the red line is the gap. So the gap is through here, and we took quite some time to confirm that on the image in the area, in the conservation area appraisal. We've come to the conclusion that the gap is to the south of the site. The site is not within the gap.
And this gap, is that where the garage is?
No, it's the garden to 103.
So it's the garden. So no, what I am saying, what I'm asking is, they're building on top of the garage, right?
Yes.
So that gap that now exists, that the garage now is 1 floor. So that bit there, what does that qualify? I mean, I know the ground is not in the conservation area, but that view, that access to, does that qualify as?
Does that have any sort of protected status?
Any weight?
No, it doesn't.
Because the argument is about this bit here, isn't it? It's not about the stuff next door.
No. The view is shown on the image above the garage is not protected. Over the brick wall, which is that view is protected or is considered.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Could I possibly comment on that?
Because
very briefly.
I apologise.
No.
We can't. We have to stick quite rigidly to the process, or we can be challenged. Sorry. Yes, Councillor Spadania.
One other question about. So moving on from the gap and the relevance of the conservation area, there's still. I'm still not convinced that. So obviously this is a photo that's been sent by the objector side, not entirely, so, this is something that you put together yourself, but it does go right up to the wall, is that correct? Right up to the garden wall? or the proposed extension?
There you can
Like
see...
there's no gap between the fence and the...
There on the right-hand image, you can see probably a bit small, but you can see a boundary fence, and then you can see the boundary wall, and then the extension above it. So it's about half a parapet width back.
Okay, and so what assessment has been done concerning the impact on loss of light?
Yes.
For the garden.
Yes.
For that garden, yep. So as you can see, so just above the red line is to the north. So all the development will be to the north of that garden in question. So as such, there'll be no material impact, I believe, on daylight and sunlight.
And then can you talk us through how you assess whether the impact on sense of enclosure is acceptable or not?
Sure. So okay, this will probably be the best image. Consider the width of the garden and also the scale of the development. So it's a single-story property with a south-facing garden and a double-story height wall proposed. All the other development in the area is 3 to about 7 stories. So within the context of that, the sense of enclosure would be, I deem, reasonable. There will be continued views westward as well over the front wall, and also eastward over the single-story structure on the neighbouring property.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Riley.
One final question, Chair, on terms of the height and the wall of the garden. On the application form and the level of the wall of the garden and the distance between, or the height between the level of the wall of the garden and the extension, the proposed extension. Can you tell us a bit more about that? And can you clarify what we've already spoke about in terms of the height, the difference between the wall of the garden and the proposed single story?
It's because it's an extra story, but you're asking in terms of measurements, or okay.
I don't have the exact measurements in front of me from the image on the right, though. It's a touch blurry. It would probably be another 2.3 meters tall, which is probably the normal stud height. The applicant would be able to confirm that exact measurement, if you wish.
I think we've got the approximate amount. Any further questions before we proceed to a vote? Right. Well, we haven't attached any additional conditions, so the case before us stands. I think there's a few considerations. We've discussed at some length the townscape gap. We've been told this is not part of the gap, but it is obviously right next to the gap and right next to the conservation area. We've discussed sense of enclosure, and this is adding an extra story on that one side, but it is predominantly to the north, so it shouldn't affect light too much. The west remains, well, is owned by the objector, I assume, but remains one story. So we've got to consider whether sense of enclosure is acceptable, and sort of general massing. Right, so the recommendation is to grant. I'll do a show of hands again. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? So that is 3 against, 1 in favour and 1 abstention. So planning permission is not granted. Could one of the people who voted against suggest reasoning for refusal?
Thank you, Chair. I will recommend that or suggest the reason for the sense of enclosure. I think that is the major fact for this one.
Okay, so unacceptable increase in sense of enclosure for the garden.
That is correct.
The neighbouring property. I assume there's no problem with us putting that forward to vote on. Is that all clear? Yeah. Okay, so that's clear. Although, oh, sorry, we need a proposer for that. Councillor Ali proposed. And a seconder. Councillor Zvedeniuk, I think, had a hand up first. Councillor Zvedeniuk second that. So all of those in favour of sense of enclosure as a reason? That's 4. All those against? So that's 4-1 passed as a reason. And that concludes that case. Planning permission is not granted. Right. We're just going to adjourn for 5 minutes before hearing the next case. Right, we're all back, so we'll reconvene the meeting. So we'll proceed to number 6, Brunswick Gardens.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just draw members' attention to the addendum report. We've received 2 additional objections and there's some minor revisions. Planning permission is proposed here for a new roof terrace and plant at main roof level on the property. There's an aerial image here just to show that the group of buildings 6 Brunswick Gardens forms part of is relatively unaltered. We do, however, have an extant planning permission at number 18, slightly further down, for a roof terrace of similar dimensions, which I'll show you shortly. It's within the Kensington Palace conservation area. This is the existing roof at the moment, with that shallow butterfly set behind a parapet wall. And the existing roof versus the proposed, with that new roof terrace, roof access and associated plant. Turning to the section drawings, you can see how that would be arranged, set back from the front and rear wall. And in a true elevation, you can see the railings proposed around the terrace. Importantly, the railings wouldn't be visible from the public realm, only from private views around the site. This is the approval granted at number 18 Brunswick Gardens. It had a smaller footprint, and we talk about that in the officer's report. It's set much further forward and backward from those parapet walls, but was set at a higher level. So in terms of visibility, that we've received supporting documentation that shows us the impact would be similar. Officers are recommending approval, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we have no speakers, so colleagues, questions? Yes, Councillor North.
Thank you. Yes, I'm familiar with this road very well, and it is a very handsome road with some gorgeous period properties. I wanted to just ask you about the extant permission from the nearby property. You're saying it's comparable with this, and as that has got, that must lead precedent to this.
It needs to weigh into your consideration as a recent decision taken under a similar local plan and in a similar context. There are differences, so the visibility from the private views will be similar, so people overlooking the site will see a terrace, but this one will be slightly bigger in terms of its area, but it's lower on the roof, so it doesn't sit as high. So it will be different, but I would say comparable and not visible from the public realm. So for us, on balance, the impact is acceptable.
So just for clarification, from the road it won't be visible, but from Inverness Gardens rear it will be visible, is that correct?
Yes, I'll just bring up the quickly the aerial image again, just to give you a view. So from properties across the street at higher levels, you would be able to see the roof terrace. From properties at the rear, again, from higher levels, you'll be able to see it. And arguably across the road from there, because those properties are much higher, because they have the mansards and they themselves have terraces in this location, I think it would be visible from them. I think it would be more difficult from these properties that sit in a perpendicular fashion, just because of the angles and the chimney stacks. But private upper level views, I think it will be visible. But given the context of what's been approved and the other kind of bits and pieces on the roof, on balance, we say it preserves.
Any other questions? No? No? Okay. In which case, we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? Is that everyone? Yep. Yep, so that's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. So let's move to 33 Wallingford Avenue.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for a replacement extension, and the addendum report, we just had some minor revisions on there. This is the existing extension we refer to in the report, some photos of it. It's kind of concealed between the neighbouring property and that closet wing projection. And you can see the neighbouring properties extension different in terms of height and form, just to the left of that image. These photos helpfully show in red what's to be demolished and in blue what's proposed. Very similar footprint, which you'll see on the plans in a second, but the height will change at its maximum point by about 50 centimetres. And you can see in section drawings there that change, but the footprint is very comparable. And again here, this is the light well we talk about in the report, and this is the neighbouring extension. So there will be a change in relationship in that there'll be a 50 centimetre increase along that boundary, but officers are recommending approval, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I just had one question on materials. Am I right in saying that we're requiring brick and timber to make sure it fits in with neighbouring properties and the conservation area?
Yes, exactly that, Chairman. So recommended condition, apologies, I should have had the right page. Condition 3 requires all work and making good to match the existing building. We could add a condition to ensure, just to specify that the windows should be timber. Actually, apologies, it's only got a door. So it would be that the door is timber. They have specified on the drawings, actually, so I think the materials will match the existing. I don't think the condition would be necessary.
Oh, okay, if that's what's already specified.
Yeah, so on the drawing there, sorry, it does say brick, timber to match, and we have that condition 3, just securing that for members.
Okay, very good. Colleagues, any other questions? This one, no, it's a fairly simple one. In which case, we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. We now proceed to number 7, St Mary Abbots Place.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is an application for a new basement level with associated light wells, and we are, on the addendum report, making some minor revisions to the report, but also importantly want to add an additional informative. Turning to the slides, this is the application site on St Mary Abbots Place, and this is the building as existing with the development next door for flats. This is the location of where proposed light wells would be to the front. This is the internal courtyard we talked to in the report, and that's the kind of rear of the back of the neighbouring building, or the side elevation. This is the proposed basement under the entire footprint of the property, but in a policy compliant way, extending only 50% into the garden. And the proposed ground floor layout, the minor alterations, including those 2 grills to the front and back to create light wells. And you can see here that the proposal is under the footprint of the existing. Importantly, that the section is taken through part of the light well, but importantly, there is planning permission already to infill that that has been granted. So a policy compliant basement, which officers are recommending approval for. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions on this case? Yes, Councillor North.
Just a quickie, really. You notified 10 properties, and yet one of the objectors said there hasn't been enough public awareness. I just wondered if you could answer this.
Yes, we've triple-checked and we have consulted in line with our statement of community involvement, and we've also published a site and press notice for this application.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, in which case we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous. Planning permission is granted. We now proceed to Gunter Hall on Gunter Grove.
Great. So the proposal is to remove side glass panels and roof trusses from an existing roof conservatory at Gunter Hall and Gunter Grove. The property is near the intersection of Fulham Road and Gunter Grove intersection. It is identified as a positive building in the Sloane Stanley Conservation Area. However, the conservation area does not record the conservatory, and The addition of the roof lantern or conservatory was recorded as being approved in 1997. Here we can see two images of the roof lantern or conservatory currently. So it is a gabled roof structure. You can stand up in the middle. You cannot stand up on the edges of it. Access to it is through an internal roof hatch. There is no external access. On the left is a view from the Fulham Road and Gunter Grove intersection. That's the front elevation. There will be no visible change from there. There will be stairs leading up to the conservatory from an existing first-storey terrace that has access, however, will be from an internal light well behind the front facade. Here we can see how that access will track, and up to the greyed out version of on the right-hand image, where you can see the glass panels have been removed. On the northward view from Fulham Road and Gunter Grove intersection, there will be no change. A small orchard is proposed, or plant boxes are proposed to be at the back of the conservatory, where the existing roof will remain. That'll end the presentation.
Thank you very much. And I'll start just with a couple of questions. The first one's on materials. What do we insist, because we want to make these steps, both the steps themselves and the railings, as attractive as possible and in keeping with the area as possible. What are we asking for in terms of materials, or what's being proposed?
Simple black construction, metal stairs and railings are being proposed. Also add, there will, in the addendum report, a condition for maintenance of the proposed green roof and green trays, which will accompany the stairs up to the conservatory.
Now, how visible are the railings from public views?
Not visible.
They're not visible. Where are there any views of the railings of the staircase?
No public views, only private, only one or two private views, one from across the rear boundary and one from the side southern boundary. No short distance direct views.
Okay, I'm just thinking that within black metal, that, you know, there's a lot of different designs, and it would be nice to have sort of cast iron traditional railings, but given that there's only sort of two long-range views, I don't want to make conditions too onerous, but is the final materials within the gift of officers to agree with the applicant?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, then that's I'm happy as long as the committee is to let officers make that judgment. Colleagues, other questions? Yes, Councillor North and then Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on the Chair's comments, actually, as a proud member of the Art Deco Society, I realised that the historical interest in this in a conservation area, and I was going to echo, actually, the type of balustrading and materials used, I think, should be sympathetic to the age and style of the property, so if there is something additional we can put in there, I think that would be appreciated by the residents.
Sure.
Maybe the best thing is if officers are going to have those conversations and sort of sign off on final materials, it might be sufficient just to minute the sort of committee's general desire for it to be sympathetic with the area, rather than actually impose a condition, because it could get complicated as to exactly what we want. Yeah. Okay. So we'll just minute that if that's okay. Yes, Councillor Idris.
And along those lines of having a conversation and just nudging people towards stuff. So when people want to come with planting and and putting anything greenery, we need to kind of encourage them, nudge them towards having some kind of pollinator as part of our lovely bee superhighway. We should always encourage people to have pollinators.
Great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry?
can add that as an informative. We've done that before, just to draw applicants' attention to the possibility and that they should be encouraged, strongly encouraged. To do it.
I think that's a good idea to add that as an informative. And then the other one was on maintenance of the green roof, because they can start to look quite sad if they're not well maintained. Do we have any conditions or requirements?
Yes, we in the addendum report, condition 4, so prior to the installation of the planter boxes / trays adjacent to the staircase, hereby approved, full particulars of the following shall be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And then details...
Does that include ongoing maintenance?
Yes, and carried out and maintained. So the details are proposed plant boxes, trays, list of species, general locations, and maintenance schedule.
Okay, happy with that. Colleagues, any other questions, or happy to proceed to a vote? Okay, well, we've minuted one point. We've added an informative on drawing the applicant's attention to the benefit of pollinators and opportunities to, we want them to look at opportunities to engage in that. So with that informative added, the recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous, and planning permission is granted. So we now move on to 25 Old Church Street.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application seeks planning permission for a single-story extension. I'm just going to run through some plans. So we've got a site location plan and the area view. As you can see, there's quite a lot of variation of the rear extension within this group of properties. And on the left-hand side, you can see the site location plan with quite an irregular garden within the site. This is the existing rear elevation, the existing ground floor plan, the proposed ground floor plan. The proposal is to extend it by 2.5 meters from the existing rear wall. The existing and proposed roof plans, existing and proposed sections, and existing and proposed rear elevation. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask quickly about drainage. So this garden area has obviously, bit by bit, been built on more and more over the years. And so I think there are reasonable concerns about drainage. Is there anything we can do to address that?
Yes, so as part of the office's report, the officers didn't recommend the SADS condition, but if the members think that would be necessary, we can definitely put that condition to ensure that the drainage would be in betterment to the existing situation.
Yeah, I think it's just because each extension in itself almost isn't that big, but the accumulated effect of all these extensions, I think, probably has had a meaningful effect on drainage. So adding a SUDS condition, I think, would be acceptable or necessary even in this. Exactly. So yes, we'd like to add that SUDS condition. Thank you. Colleagues, any other questions on this one? Yes, Councillor Svidenia.
Thank you. I'd just like some clarity. A number of public comments objecting refer to previous planning applications. Specifically, the 8 roof lights were granted, and they're asking for an addition of 2. Can you just quickly explain how this interacts with the previous applications?
Absolutely. I'm just going to go back to the plans. It might be easier. Actually, this one might be helpful. So as you can see on the top is the existing roof plan. In the middle is the courtyard. As part of the previous application, they proposed to infill that courtyard with the extension, and they've got planning permission for that. And then also, as part of the same permission, we've granted permission for the changes to the rear wall of the existing rear extension and the infill of the courtyard. As part of this application, they are not seeking infilling the courtyard, but of course they could still implement that permission. But in addition, they're proposing the 2.5 meters extension towards the garden. Hopefully that clarifies.
So the increase in the number of roof lights would bring the total to 10. Is that correct?
I think the members need to think about the application in front of you. As part of this application, they're only proposing 2 additional roof lights in this area where the extension is going to go.
Okay, and you're confident that the roof lights wouldn't be bothersome to neighbours?
Sorry, we are confident.
That the roof lights wouldn't have an impact on neighbours?
Yes, that's correct. This is not an unusual element within the area, such as this one.
Okay, so there are other similar structures on the same street in the gardens?
I mean, roof lights. As you can see, hopefully on this area view, you can see that other properties got roof lights.
Yeah.
For example, the property next door, also this one here. So yes, roof lights are not an unusual element.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. My question is the impact on living conditions, and it's been covered on the report 6.10. As it's been covered on 6.10, can you just make sure that the property and the development will not impact loss of lights as well as overbearing for the neighbouring residents or neighbouring occupants?
Yeah, so as part of the office's recommendation, we are satisfied with the living conditions of the neighbouring properties, mostly because, as you can see on this image here to the left, we've got a quite whole boundary wall, which wouldn't be affected by the extension. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the existing boundary treatment with the neighbouring property, so we were satisfied with the impact.
Any further questions or happy to proceed to a vote? Okay. Well, we've added a condition on SUDS, which is our standard SUDS condition. So with that addition, the recommendation is to grant. Can I see all those in favour? So that's unanimous, and planning permission is granted, which brings us to the end of tonight's proceedings. Oh, we've got one more. Sorry. I was halfway home. Yeah. 3 Cromwell Road, of course. How could I forget? 3 Cromwell Road.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is the last one for tonight. So this application is seeking retrospective advertisement consent to display 1 number non-illuminated signage. You can see the existing photographs of the site. So we've got the proposed signage on the right-hand side. You can see it within the wider context of the site and the site elevation. I would like to draw members' attention that this application also only seeks permission, consent for the signage, not for the plants around it. That is not part of this application. This is just the wider view of the site. You can see the context. There's quite a lot of variation with a more modern building to the right. And the existing and site elevations. And the proposed signage. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just ask about the size of the sign? Because obviously it's in a conservation area, and it's opposite an important listed building. Is it larger than normal, given that context? Are there other examples of a sign that prominent or that large in such a sensitive location?
I think given the size of the building and where it's located and given the wider context of the site, we were satisfied that on balance the size of the signage is appropriate for this location. In terms of the other similar signages, I couldn't find it, but there are quite significant signage around this site. And the proposal is for approximately 1 meter wide. Sorry, I'm just... but I think, as you can see it within this image, it sits quite comfortably within the site itself, giving its large context.
Just as a follow-up to that, could you tell us what, if anything, they could build without permission? So is there like automatic advertising consent which they don't need to apply for?
Yes, they can, if it's non-illuminated signage of a certain size. I believe this one, because of its height and width, they have to apply for the consent. But smaller size advertisement which are not illuminated, some of them they can display without any consent.
Okay, so they can advertise their business with the sign without coming to us?
Not in this, but this signage itself requires consent, but generally speaking, they
so
could.
they can put up some
something.
sign without coming to us, but the reason they're coming to us is because it's a bit bigger than what they could automatically have. Yes, Councillor Idris.
This sign is not illuminated, is it?
No, it's not. So as part of the enforcement investigation, I believe the previous signage was illuminated, but as part of this application, the signage is non-illuminated.
Okay. And why is everybody writing to us about the plastic flowers?
Yeah, I think it's just the visual. The members of public are concerned in terms of the visual aspect of the fake plants.
And is that something we deal with in planning?
Yes, so enforcement
team.
The enforcement team is investigating it as we speak. I believe they serve notice, enforcement notice on them to remove it. Unfortunately, I can't really update where we are with it, but that is part of the enforcement investigation.
Right. Thank you. And I think as the home of the B superhighway, we should always endeavour to have natural plants as opposed to plastic ones. Thank you.
Yeah, no, completely agree. So they're coming to us for a larger sign. I just want to know, and this might be difficult to answer, but is there any quid pro quo? So are they saying, look, we could do something smaller without coming to you, but it would be uglier in a less sensitive location, it would affect the look of the architecture more. So let us do something which is a bit bigger but is better located. Is there any element of that?
I'm not aware of any conversation between the officers and the applicant about an alternative design or alternative size of the advert. As part of this application, we were confident with the size of it, and on balance, we thought is appropriate in this location. But if members think it's not appropriate, then you would have to recommend the refusal.
Yeah, no, I don't know where colleagues are, but I'm just thinking this is such a sensitive location, being in a conservation area, being opposite such an important listed building, that, even given the size of those buildings, it might not be appropriate. But what I don't want to do is turn it down and then they put up something they're allowed to do without permission, and it's actually worse, but legal. Could that happen?
Yeah, that could have happened.
Okay. Yes, Councillor North.
So just for clarification's sake on this, we're not talking about the plastic flowers, we're not talking about any other signage, it's just simply the large round sign, which is in position now. I know we're not taking into the fact this is a retrospective. I'm just confused how anybody could think that they could put this up without checking first with the planning department and the local authority, or was there some previous communication and there was some breakdown in communication, or just trying to understand why.
Is this about the sign?
The sign, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. Probably the application came to us because of the enforcement investigation.
Yeah.
Usually that's what happens, that we are notified about some works that they require consent. So I believe it started with the enforcement investigation and then they've applied for an application to us.
So it wasn't a misunderstanding on the sign that was applied. There's no previous application and they've put a bigger sign than they should have done. This is simply they put it up, they've been found out, the investigations happened and they've come for retrospective.
It's possible that they didn't know they needed permission, because you can put up signs without permission, but this just exceeds the size. So maybe they didn't know, who knows. But anyway, they do need permission, so. I don't know if you have anything to add, no. Any other questions on this? Yes. Question is the sign temporary or permanent?
No, it's a permanent, 5 years. Advertisement, I consent for 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. My only concern would have been if there was a light or light pollution, but obviously this is not illuminated, so it's a sign of changing what they previously had. So I have no other comments. I think that has been covered already.
Happy for us to proceed to a vote? Yeah. I mean, my initial